Chapter 1307. To celebrate the opening of the weave. The first 10 spellcasters to be bound to the weave will receive a supreme gift pack. Regardless of their rank, they will enjoy a 50% discount on magic power for 10 years, and 3 additional metamagic specializations for each element. The first 100 to be bound to the weave will receive a golden gift pack. The first 1,000 to be bound to the weave will receive a silver gift pack. Anyone who is bound to the weave will receive a beginner's gift pack, which can be stacked with the previous packs. Spellcasters of the Alliance will enjoy an additional 95% discount on magic power consumption. Those of Stormwind nationality will enjoy an additional 88% discount on magic power consumption. In reality, after the first 1,000, the weave's mana would basically be balanced, and Duque would not need to dig Peter to pay Paul. Not to mention those at the back, even those at the front would not necessarily be able to take advantage of Duque. It was just like how the so-called local handicrafts in Du Zhe's previous world were all from Yiwu. It would be foolish to buy them at a 50% discount, but he would still make a profit even if he gave them a 10% discount. On the surface, Duque seemed to be selling them at a huge discount. There were so many tricks that even Duque's little conscience felt apologetic. For example, an ordinary sky wizard would need 50 units of mana to cast a beginner fireball. In reality, to achieve the same effect, they did not need that much. Magic education in this era was actually very primitive. One pharaoh had found a more feasible path and then taught it by example. A large number of people knew how to use it and it became a classic. Coupled with the fact that pharaoh with a bit of a brain chose the wrong talent and ran off to do all sorts of research, very few pharaoh cared about the efficiency of basic magic and whether it could be improved. If your fireball can't kill your enemy, it's because your fireball isn't big enough, it's not fierce enough. 90% of the mentors said this. This was because the fireball would dissipate very quickly once it left the mage's control. To throw it 30 yards away and still maintain its power when it hit someone, they would only focus on gathering the fire elements and ignore the other problems. Duque was different. In the past, the Dalajan was under Antonida's control, so naturally he had no room to interfere. After Ronan became the chairman of Kirin Tor, Duque was so busy that he had no time to care about the mages. Now that Duque was going to become the god of mages, even if he was only a demigod, he had the obligation to seduce. Oh no, to correct the mistakes of those newbie mages. First, the magic model. In the past, those fellows had used messy models and Duque looked down on them. If they wanted to use the weave, they had to use his model. If someone had the ability to remove the halo of divinity from the weave and study it carefully, they would discover that the fire magic and ice magic were filled with fluid dynamics applications. All magic shot out has experienced a similar flat nozzle contraction process like a water gun. Next was the predetermined firing trajectory. In the past, the spells would be thrown out in a straight line, and they wouldn't care where they flew halfway. It was a good thing if he could hit it, but if he couldn't, he could only blame it on his bad luck. Accuracy was not a consideration, it was all about quantity. This was also why the mages had to form teams of mages to be more powerful. Because blindly and randomly shooting, no matter how reckless the enemy was, they would be blasted to pieces. Now Duque paid attention to the firing trajectory of magic. Any flow of fire or ice magic was actually a process of heat change and transfer. If a little more magic was used in advance to disperse the heat or cold air between oneself and the target, then according to the laws of thermodynamics, heat could spontaneously transfer from a hot object to a cold object, but it could not spontaneously transfer from a low-temperature object to a high-temperature object. This allowed fireballs and ice arrows to follow the predetermined trajectory to attack the target. According to the knowledge that Duque had learned in university and the theory of Azeroth magic, with the final optimization by the system genie, what was obtained was the explosive, magically modified version of the weave magic. While he was busy breaking through to the demigod level, the allied army was not idle. With the support of Tyron's true Starfall, they had a plan and step-by-step to sweep Silithus clean. After using up the wreckage of the void battleships that could be smashed down from the atmosphere, they finally completely destroyed the 3 insect nests of Ash, Leg and Zora. Under the cover of the flying fortress Naxxramas, the allied army began to slowly advance in the direction of the ancient city of Ahn'Qiraj. In the War of the Shifting Sands, it was the dragons who obtained air superiority for the night elves. They used their powerful breath and unstoppable strength to reap the lives of the Qiraj insect people. In this life, when most of the dragons were tied up in the void battlefield, it was the terrifying cannons of the flying fortress that cleaned up all the insect people of a large scale. The exploding Type 3 bombs easily cleared up large areas of the airspace. The high-explosive bombs mercilessly plowed the ground. 1,000 years ago, the night elves under Fandrel's command practically braved the rain of insect corpses to advance. Today, 1,000 years later, the ones opening the way were steam tanks equipped with anti-sand filters. They used the huge engines with shovels to open a bloody path for the Allied army. Because the largest insect nest had been completely destroyed, the Allied army didn't spend much effort to reach the wall of beetles. The wall of beetles outside of Ankh-Karaj had continuously spewed out swarms of insects during the War of the Shifting Sands 1,000 years ago, almost destroying all of Kalimdor. This time, thanks to Duque letting Naxxramas fall from Ankh-Karaj and removing the other insect nests first, there weren't many insects left on the beetle platform in front of the wall of beetles. But everyone knew that in time, when the ancient god of Ankh-Karaj, Si-Thun, regained his breath, the swarm of insects would once again rush out at an extremely high density and speed. At that time, any formation, any defense would be completely destroyed. To clean up this situation, they had to open the wall of beetles again, kill their way into Ankh-Karaj and completely get rid of Si-Thun. The night elf priestess Hiloma held the quicksand staff in her hand. 1,000 years ago, because Fandral Stagelm's son died, the furious Fandral smashed the quicksand staff and cut off his connection with the dragons. But this time, with the united efforts of the Allied army, the staff was reforged. Hiloma explained at the end, the wall of beetles must be opened again. The seal from before was already incomplete. After General Marcus smashed Naxxramas into Ankh-Karaj, the seal was already on the verge of collapse. No need to say more, we all understand. Sar nodded. On the other side, Magni swung the Balrog hammer, looking eager to give it a try. Behind him, other than Duque and the missing Ronin and the rest, stood all the powerhouses of the Alliance, including William. A few days ago, the team led by William finally killed the evil god hacker in Zul, Gurub, and then the entire team teleported over to meet up with the main army. Chapter 1308. Clang. The quicksand staff struck a huge gong, and with the deafening sound of the gong, the 10-story wall of beetles suddenly opened the largest door. The next moment, an endless swarm of beetles surged out and attacked the Allied army's formation at the city gate. It was like a huge wave crashing against a stone embankment. Even if they were prepared, all the Allied army could do here was maintain the battle line. Any attempt to advance further was impossible. It was supposed to be like this. Fire the cannons, blast them. Naxxramas' new chief commander, Bulang Bronzebeard, shouted. The entire stronghold shone from bottom to top. That was the light of the cannons. For a normal warship, it was already impressive to have a 3-story cannon hold. Naxxramas had broken this limit. From bottom to top, after modifications, there were a total of 18 stories. The top and bottom 8 stories were all 155mm cannons and below. The middle 6 stories were all kinds of crazy things. Super large mortars, cannons that were originally at the level of railway guns, and even stronghold cannons. The super cannons that were originally abandoned by the dwarves because they were too difficult to transport, or because they were not very practical, were now all pulled out by Magni's orders. It was not easy to get such a big treasure like Naxxramas, and as a moving stronghold with a main city-level portal. Other than Elusia's insistence on Duque's order, which forbade the master craftsman Jurban from installing laboratories in the stronghold, the dwarves and gnomes had installed all the crazy things in it. In the end, within a month, Naxxramas had become such a ferocious existence. 2,000 cannons of various calibers, the target was more than 5,000. There were already 36 wizard towers, 108 under construction. The final target was 256. Among them, there were 36 wizard towers for Radiant Moon mages to oversee, and 3 for Breaking Dawn mages. Even if there were only 2,000 cannons, there were only 500 on each of the 4 sides. Its power was definitely at a level that could destroy heaven and earth. Fire the cannons, fire the cannons. Bu Lang was inexplicably excited. Unlike his 2 elder brothers, although he could also use God's Descent, it was not strong. Bu Lang's talent was basically focused on long-range weapons. After careful study, he even proposed the idea of transforming Naxxramas into a multifaceted fortress. This way, no matter which direction the enemy attacked the stronghold from, they would receive a more three-dimensional counterattack. Now, under the bombardment of the cannons, tons of Karaji bugmen were blown into the sky and turned into dregs. They fell to the ground like heavy rain, forming a thick mountain of bug corpses. Bu Lang frowned and gave the second order: all mortars will drop incendiary bombs. A few minutes later, the entire wall of beetles had turned into a fiery purgatory. Fortunately, the direction of the wind was from north to south. Otherwise, the burnt smell of the insect carcasses would definitely make people unable to eat any meat for a few days. After half a day of bombardment, it seemed that the Kila insect troops also knew that they were no match for the Allied forces in the wilderness, and a large number of insects retreated. "Advance," Bu Lang ordered. But soon, a warning came from the fortress control system. "DD. Warning. Warning. There is an unknown gravitational field ahead. Naxxramas is in danger of crashing again if forced to advance." Apart from Duque, no one understood how this system warning came about. They could only speculate that Thun seemed to be up to something. "Big brother, do we force an attack?" Bulai asked. Magni slapped his third brother's horned helmet. "Idiot. Thun is an ancient god after all. The Alliance worked so hard to get a floating fortress, it would be terrible if it fell. Next time, see if those magicians would let the Dalajan take the lead?" Yes. It was not easy to get such a powerful flying fortress. If it really fell, the Alliance's advantage would be greatly weakened. After spending a whole day, the Alliance used steam tanks and cranes to clear the passage behind the wall of beetles. There were two huge areas in front of the Allied forces. The east side was the area that had been hit by Naxxramas, and was temporarily called the Karaj Ruins. There were a lot of powerful creatures detected there. The west side was the main building of the Karaj temple. "I suggest we split into two groups. Otherwise, if we all attack one group, it will only make the other group attack from the back," Sal said. Magni and the other leaders of the Alliance fell silent. It was true that the Alliance and the Horde had formed an alliance. However, in the absence of Duke, both Magni and William did not have enough power and prestige to suppress Thrall and hold absolute command in the Alliance, even though both sides had tried their best to cooperate sincerely. After thinking for a while, Magni and William looked at each other and understood each other's thoughts. A melon that was forcefully twisted would not be sweet. "Then I'll have to trouble the Horde to attack the Kiraj ruins." Magni turned and said, "Your Majesty, Jaina." "Yes." Jaina responded, then walked in front of Sal and handed him a 30-page document. "This is the information that Commander Duke Marcus came up with after consulting a lot of historical materials about the War of the Shifting Sands and asking the dragon and night elf commanders who participated in the war." Sal, Woken and Grom's pupils instantly shrank. They were old friends. Even if they had different standpoints, Duque's information was rarely wrong when it came to the Allied forces facing a strong enemy. "General Ajax. Scar the Scarless Osrian? Thank Duque for me." Sal nodded heavily. "Please note that the records in the historical materials are not complete. These are only the parts that are recorded. For the rest, please adapt to the situation," Jaina emphasized. Of course, she knew that Duque should have detailed information about the color of the fur on the enemy leader's butt. But the Alliance was not obliged to provide it to the Horde. If it was the Horde in the past, Duque might have given more detailed information to preserve the strength of the Allied forces. But now, the gazes of the three Windwalker sisters were like arrows, shooting towards Sal's back with xiao. Similarly, the Alliance's priests and paladins also looked over there with ugly expressions. If it weren't for the Kiraj insect people and Thun, who were even more terrifying enemies, they might have been completely defeated. Sal was a little embarrassed, but he didn't regret it. From the day he recruited the Forsaken into the Horde's camp, he had foreseen this scene. The former Great Chief Orgrim and the other chiefs, plus the former Sun King Anastrian and the Silver Moon Council had all become Death Knights and Liches. It would be strange if the Alliance gave them a good attitude. That was why Sar had suggested splitting the army and why Magni had agreed. Without Duque or Anduin Lothar, who had defeated the Horde, they really couldn't control the situation. Chapter 1309. The Alliance and the Horde split up. Thrall wasn't careless. Other than pulling the Horde's main force, he also borrowed half a division of steam tanks. Thrall simply asked for cover fire. The Alliance didn't dare to let Naxxramas go up, but it was still possible to get a tank division and 2 flying battleships. The Skybreaker was left behind and the Flying Dutchman and Black Pearl came up. It turned out that the Allied forces were a little oversensitive. They seemed to have realized that areas outside the protection of Sea Thun's divine power were no match for the Alliance's artillery. The Kiraj Bugmen had no intention of fighting the Alliance outside. The Alliance drove all the way to the main hall of the Kiraj Temple. The moment they stepped through the door, countless Alliance soldiers felt dizzy and vomited. Sea Thun's evil aura? Tyron didn't look too good either. She felt that the power of the moon goddess Elun was being rejected. It wasn't that it couldn't be used at all, but if they wanted to use it they would have to pay a higher price. Everyone below the level of a hero, leave. William waved his hand and ordered decisively. There weren't many mortals who entered. With the help of the stronger ones, they barely managed to complete the evacuation. This isn't good. If only the hero squad can enter, it'll be troublesome if we get surrounded. Magni took off his helmet, scratched his head and put it back on. Jaina was the most careful. She pointed at the stairs. Look carefully. There aren't many traces of insects stepping on the stairs. If I'm not wrong, those with insufficient status aren't allowed to enter the main hall. If a large number of insects' sharp legs had pierced through the stairs countless times, no matter how hard it would be full of holes. It seemed that humans were divided into different levels and so were insects. Along the way it wasn't just ordinary insects that attacked them but powerful monsters. The 10-story tall monster, the Anubisath Defender, looked like a typical Egyptian dog-headed giant. Not only did it leave a deep impression with its heavy punches, it would also self-destruct after dying. If not for Duque's strategy, people would have died in minutes. The Obsidian Cleanser, which looked a little like a sphinx and had a purplish-black body, could release disgusting energy shockwaves and mindlessly blow people up. When the Alliance's hero squad slowly advanced in front of the Prophet Skirim, everyone carefully looked through the strategy left behind by Duque. They needed a total of 3 warriors. There weren't many warriors who had stepped into the realm of heroes these days. When Anduin Lothar was still around, all he could see were warriors. Ever since there were paladins who could fight, tank and heal, most of the Alliance's melee classes went to become paladins. Back then the 5 Silver Saints were all warriors. When asked if Gavin Rad and the others could turn back, he said that he was used to it and that it was not good to turn back. He had no choice but to let Bulang Bronzebeard run back to make a cameo. Bulang put down his beloved shotgun, picked up his axe and shield and used charge. He looked pretty decent. Just like that, the eldest and 3rd brother of the Bronzebeard family as well as William, barely made up 3 warrior tanks to tank the boss. As the number 1 in the Kiraj Divine Temple, Prophet Skirim's fighting style wasn't too disgusting. Anyone who could beat Majordomo in the Molten Core should be able to deal with him. In theory, this boss with a lower body like a spider, upper body like a steamed lobster, and a cockroach hanging on its chest shouldn't be difficult to deal with. The problem was that the leader of the Kiraj Divine Temple wasn't stupid. If he were to stand guard one by one, wouldn't he be waiting for the boss to come and kill him? It was as if he had poked a hornet's nest. Almost as soon as Magni rushed up to fight Skirim, an evil energy wave suddenly spread out from the ground. The range of this wave was so wide that it almost covered an area the size of at least 10 football fields in front of and behind the main gate of the temple. Without any warning, the ground within this area collapsed. The majestic main hall of the Kiraj Divine Temple, along with the huge dome that was the size of a battleship, the thick stone pillars that required 5 people to wrap their arms around, and the exquisite and beautiful hard floor tiles all collapsed. This was so big that it left all the Alliance powerhouses speechless. None of the Alliance powerhouses knew how to fly. As the debris fell like rain, everyone screamed and fell. Watch my pseudo-levitation spell. Gavin Rad reacted immediately. He waved his wind sword and the strong wind from the divine artifact sword blew under everyone's feet. It slightly supported everyone and slowed down their falling speed. In theory they wouldn't die from the fall, but a new problem arose. Everyone's falling speed slowed down, but the huge rocks above them were still falling at the same speed. For everyone who couldn't dodge in midair, this meant heavy casualties. Attack. The Windrunner sisters were the first to react. The three sisters suddenly twisted their bodies and changed their posture to be upside down so that it was easier to shoot with their bows. The arrows mixed with the power of wind and lightning rushed up and smashed the rocks above them. While the Windrunner sisters were covering them, everyone else started to summon their flying mounts, pure-blood fire eagles. Bright flames flew out of everyone's hands and turned into a huge fire eagle in the blink of an eye. Only when the fire hawks carried the heroes did the situation change a little. There's something down there. Sasha's eyes were the sharpest. Half a second later she shouted, "Enemy!" It's a family of three and the leader of the sludge. A family of three was the abbreviation of Lord Carey, Princess Yaj and Vim. They were the leaders of the three gigantic insects of different sizes and colors. The leader that looked like a sludge monster was the aberration monster, Vistus. "Don't go down, it's a trap." William was the first to react. "Don't act according to the enemy's plan." This was the instinct of a commander. Just as everyone was about to fly up on their pure-blood fire eagles, an ear-piercing buzzing sound came from afar. Everyone was familiar with this sound. It was the buzzing sound of bees flying. The problem was, where did such a huge bee come from? The first to rush out of the darkness and enter the vision of the Alliance powerhouses was a huge green insect. There were many red spots on her wings. Princess Huhuran. Aurelia turned pale with fright. Most of the people were suspended in midair. Aerial battles weren't something that mortals were good at. Even if everyone had a pure-blood fire eagle to carry them, it still wouldn't work. No one believed that a pure-blood fire eagle that was only slightly stronger than a griffin would be a match for a flying insect like Princess Huhuran. Oh, I have to do it after all? There was only one person who didn't summon a pure-blood fire eagle despite being supported by Gavin Radsgale, Countess Katrana. In fact, even if she was left alone, she wouldn't fall to her death. This was because she was the famous Black Dragon Princess, Xianxia. Chapter 13:10. Xianxia let out a long howl and a pair of black wings grew out of her bare back. Her 4 limbs turned into sharp claws in the blink of an eye, and her smooth and tender skin was instantly covered with dense and solid scales. Her reddish-black robe instantly turned into rags, revealing her colossal dragon body. A meteor hammer-like tail also grew out of her buttocks. In just a breath's time she had already completely taken on the form of a colossal dragon. Under the surprised gazes of the Alliance heroes, this colossal black dragon was rapidly growing in size and fearlessly charging forward. "Well done!" Varian exclaimed happily. Originally, William did not have a good impression of Xianxia, the evil black dragon who had caused him so much trouble last year, caused him to split into 2, and even almost gave up the right to rule Stormwind City. If the person who claimed to have subdued her wasn't Duke Marcus, whom he respected, he would have immediately turned hostile and forced the other party to execute this black dragon. Evil must be eradicated. His ghost wolf personality drove him to do so. But now everyone, including William, was extremely glad that the Alliance had Xianxia, a powerful colossal dragon who didn't belong to the Dragon Slumber Shrine, to help them. Without her, the Alliance heroes would probably be beaten up. "Let's fly up. We can't let Magni be up there alone," William shouted. Under his command, the powerhouses all controlled the fire eagles to dodge the falling rocks and fly up. Woo! At this moment, another existence rushed out of the darkness at high speed. From afar it looked like a little elf soaring among the flowers. She had the appearance of a human and 2 pairs of transparent cicada wings. She was covered with a white veil and wore a low-cut evening gown that bound her breasts. Didn't she look very beautiful? Apart from the 2 horn-like giant bugs on her shoulders, the green claws that were curled up and the pair of feet, claws, that only had 3 fingers. If that was the case, she was indeed a beauty. The problem was that everyone in the Alliance knew that she was the leader of Encourage Sartura. She used a brainless whirlwind slash right from the start. The formless wind blades easily covered the entire upper floor. She did not participate in the battle between Black Dragon and Princess Huhuran at all. She even took the initiative to avoid the battle. Knowing that the wind blades of Whirlwind Slash would not be able to hit the pure-blooded Firehawk in the distance, she only did one thing: block the entire airspace, forbidding the Alliance from flying up. Not only her but more Kiraj insect people flew over. They took the risk of being killed by falling rocks and sealed off the entire airspace. William's facial muscles kept twitching as he looked at the sealed airspace again. Finally, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Let's go down. Don't separate. That's right. He had no choice but to go down. Be it Magni or Onyxia, they were both people who could hold on for a long time on their own. He could only wish them luck. After he made up his mind, the things he had to do became much clearer. At first glance, this was a huge cave with a depth of more than a kilometer. In the vast dark space, there were plenty of places for the flying insects to soar and attack back and forth. Outside, they could have the support of the Alliance's cannons. However, in this cave there were leader-level insects on the ground, and they had to be wary of the enemies that swooped down from time to time. Needless to say, annihilation was the only outcome. We have to find cover. William shouted. There. Queen Sylvanas raised her hand and a lightning arrow shot over. Along with the lightning, everyone saw that it was a huge hole in midair. The hole was about 2 stories high, and could allow 4 carriages to pass through side by side. However, for the current situation where there were enemies all around, it was already the best place to hide. No matter how bad it was better than directly falling into the mouths of a family of 3. It was at this moment that Sartura swooped down. As she swept past, she activated a powerful whirlwind slash. The violent wind blades easily scattered the Alliance's flying formation. Brawl Bearhide's Firehawk couldn't dodge in time, and was killed by the whirlwind slash on the spot. If he hadn't instantly transformed into a giant bear with thick skin and flesh, he would probably have died as well. Grab my hand. As the other main force of King was Iron Triangle, Vale Era barely managed to save Brawl. No. We have to do something. William shouted. Duque, help. Jaina couldn't help but shout in the weave. If possible, Duque wanted to spend more time perfecting his weave. He had never thought that his weave would have to undergo a test so soon. Spellcasters who were connected to the weave could contact it, but most of their requests would be ignored. Duque wasn't a super operator with 1,000 brains. In order to maintain the newborn weave, his system elves were almost operating at full capacity. However, this voice couldn't be ignored by Duque because the one calling him was Jaina. Duque, I need your magical support, the kind that can instantly annihilate thousands of flying insects. Alright. Duque's direct reply in the weave made Jaina overjoyed. Communication through divine will was the most direct. In just half a second, Duque understood the whole story. Damn it. Mere insects, do you think you're an eel? You even dare to touch my girl? The entire weave was responding to its owner's anger. Apart from the flapping of the flying insect's wings, there shouldn't be too many other sounds in the void. Suddenly, it was as if the darkness would split open at any time and a sun would jump out. The rocks and sand around the fire eagle that should have been falling at a higher speed seemed to have broken free from the restraints of gravity and sputtered horizontally. A terrifying aura with great majesty rose from behind Jaina and Lucia, and the insects that were flying in the air started to cry out strangely. They screamed, wanting to get close to the 2 female spellcasters and get rid of them first. However, a formless elemental wave swept across the void. It was as if there was a pair of gigantic air palms above and below that suddenly pressed down on all the insects, causing them to hover in the air. They couldn't move up nor down, nor could they advance nor retreat. They were stuck there awkwardly, becoming pitiful live targets. In the next instant, the darkness around the 2 female spellcasters suddenly parted, and a dazzling white light lit up the entire dark cave like the first snowfall of winter. Reflected in everyone's eyes were countless rays of pure white light piercing through the vast darkness of the void. It was as if the heavenly river was flowing in reverse, attacking from below towards the sky. Blizzard? No. This was more than 1,000 top-notch frost arrows. In theory, this would require at least 1,000 radiant moon archmages at the same time, each casting for 5 seconds. However, with the support of the weave, Jaina and Lucia easily achieved this. The blooming flower of ice was like a blooming white chrysanthemum. Chapter 13:11. In midair, apart from Sartura and Princess Huhuran, who was fighting fiercely at a higher altitude, every single Kiraj flying insect was completely torn into pieces after a sharp wind-breaking sound. Their long shins, sharp claws, and sharp mouthparts were all broken and scattered in the air. In less than half a second, they would turn into ice and fall to the ground along with the mud falling from the sky. In an instant, it was as if the entire world had become quiet. Not to mention Sartura. Even Princess Huhuran and her family of 3 were shocked. Inside the Karazhan, Duke spat on the ground. Tisk. The magic net was built with the main cities of the Alliance and Horde as the core nodes. In the Karaj temple, Thun had used some mysterious power to resist the magic net's coverage. The wave of Jaina's power just now was also the last wave. Right before the magic net was forcefully cut off, Duque sent a message to Jaina. Hold on, I have to save Magni first. In reality, before the magic net was completed, Duque's advancement had already been completed. He had wanted to spend more time to build a better foundation. Unfortunately, the Allied forces would not stop advancing to wait for him. Previously, Tyrant had purposely slowed down the progress at the cost of human lives. Sometimes it was like this. When the situation was pressing, only those who could grow faster under the pressure would be able to carve out a bloody path in the face of adversity. Khadgar. I'll go to Ankaraj. I'll leave the magic net to you for now, Duque instructed. Master, the problem is that there are more and more requests to connect. Khadgar frowned. Then informed the spellcasters who have used the magic net many times. Now that the magic net is newly built, overuse may cause a heavy burden on the spellcaster's mind and soul. Limit the number of times they can use the magic net in the first month, Duque said grandly. Khadgar bared his teeth. Although adding a usage limit was definitely a considerate measure for new spellcasters, how many people could see through the dilemma of not having enough mana in the magic net? Furthermore, if Duque were to go personally, it would probably be a huge mana overdraft. Alright. If the boss moved his lips, the lackeys would naturally have to run their legs. Khadgar and the other elemental emissaries looked at each other and saw the bitter smiles in each other's eyes. You don't need to say anything, just get to work. Duque waved Atish, and a purplish-blue long and narrow teleportation door appeared in front of him. The meticulous Khadgar noticed that this portal was narrower than usual, giving off a sharper feeling. His eyes were not playing tricks on him. This was a portal used to break through space. The Karaj Divine Temple was Thun's territory. As an ancient god, of course, he wouldn't let his enemies come and go as they pleased. You want to open a portal to enter? No way. It was supposed to be like this. However, the space attribute of the drumstick wasn't just for show. With the unpleasant cawing of the 3 ghost crows, Duque's spirit began to cross the void and came to the outside of the temple of Karaj. Heh. What a small flaw. Originally, the Karaj Divine Temple was a solid piece of land. No one would be able to open a portal to enter. Ever since the honest and reliable Duque forcefully smashed Naxxramas in and turned the large area of the Divine Temple into the ruins of Karaj, a flaw had appeared in Thun's spatial defense. Even though Thun had patched up the flaw later on, it could still be considered a flaw. This was a flaw that even a normal Breaking Dawn Archmage couldn't exploit, but Duque had immediately grasped it. Duque stretched out his right hand. At the same time, outside the spatial defense layer thousands of miles away, an identical but larger arcane energy palm appeared and tore open the hole in the spatial defense layer with one hand. Without giving Thun any time to react, Duque's main body directly stepped into the portal and teleported over at high speed. On the other side, the bitter Magni was being abused. The area that he was in had already collapsed, but the problem was that before he fell, Prophet Skirim had used its 2 claws hidden under its rose-red sleeves to grab him and teleported him deeper into the Divine Temple. Initially, the battle was still going well. Relying on the advantage of the Balrog's hammer, Magni relied on the god's descent state and used his enlarged body to solo Prophet Skirim. Needless to say, when Magni really took out a quarter of this lobster-shaped monster boss HP, a nightmare came. Every time Skirim lost a quarter of its HP, it would create 2 doppelgangers. As long as there was no one next to the main body or the doppelganger, it would mindlessly throw spells. Things like Great Earthquake Strike, Magic Explosion, Frost Trap, and all sorts of other random spells. According to normal tactics, the 3 main tanks would pull the main body and the doppelganger, and everyone would concentrate their firepower to kill the doppelganger first. This was because the doppelganger's attack power was even higher than the main body. But now that Magni was the only one left, he immediately felt bitter. The boss had doppelgangers and they were running all over the street. He had wanted to catch one and kill it first, but in the end it could teleport and not to a fixed location. If it caught up, it would teleport away and Magni was fooled. There were a few times when Magni wanted to leave and find a hole or even dig a hole himself and fall in. But he found that the ground was extremely solid, and he was at least 1,000 meters away from the main door of the temple. He could only miserably run around with Skiram and be kited by him again and again. He knew that when the duration of his god's descent ended, it would be time for him to die in battle. Just at this moment, a mysterious purplish-blue light suddenly appeared beside Magni. That dazzling light was like the light of the birth of all things. Perhaps the life on Earth came from sunlight, and it was incompatible with the purplish-blue color. But this ball of light gave people a feeling that it was full of wisdom. At that moment in the originally decaying temple, all the other colors dimmed. It was as if there was no other color in the world. The space suddenly trembled. A crack in space that wasn't very wide was forcefully torn open, and became a slightly narrow teleportation door. A man in a blue and white magic robe walked out. Magni almost threw himself at him with tears and snot. Duque's eyelids twitched. Why did this Duque sound like it was calling him, but why did it feel like Magni was calling him father? I don't have such an ugly son. Duque kicked Magni, who had rushed over to hug Magni's leg after he had dispelled God's descent. Scram. When there were comrades standing behind him that needed his protection, Magni was the most reliable warrior. He fully demonstrated what it meant by heaven to the left and warriors to the right, with his ridiculously hard body. However, in the face of a demigod like Duke, Mag actually cowered in fear. Chapter 13:12. Terrified. Yes. He was a king coward. Perhaps he was trying to conserve his energy, or perhaps he felt that he had to leave a useful body for the next battle. This burly dwarf took out a tower shield from his storage bag and carried it on his back. He changed his axe to a shield in his left hand and a hammer in his right. From afar he looked like a tortoise if he didn't have the Balrog hammer. Duke rolled his eyes and decided not to bother with this guy anymore. He spread out his spirit sense and sensed that although Jaina and the others were in a sorry state, they were fine. Duke exhaled a breath of turbid air. Phew, all right. Although I don't know who taught you to divide and annihilate, but since you're so good at it, I can't hold back. Let's deal with you quickly and meet up with the others. Suddenly, Skiram replied to Duque, Long live Thun. Duque, huh? This guy could talk. He didn't have much of an impression after fighting so many times. After all, this guy wasn't strong and hadn't been wiped out many times. But your boss Thun is already more than 10,000 years old. Are you sure you want to wish him long live? Duque laughed shamelessly and made his move. Prophet Skiram was faster than Duque. He instinctively sensed that the elemental state around Duque wasn't right, so he didn't choose to use Magic Burst. Instead he let his main body and doppelganger release Great Earthquake Strike at the same time. Duque frowned. Skiram had obviously held back just now. When that shocking force of nature hit him, he instinctively realized that if he was in his normal state he would definitely be sent flying by this force. No, being sent flying was already a good thing. The worst thing was to be hit by 3 great earthquake strikes at the same time. That scene would probably be like a pile driver. He would become a pillar and be driven deep into the ground. Mag was about to remind Duque to be careful. However, he saw that Duque did not make any extra movements. He just pressed one hand into the void and suddenly, a faint sound of wind whistling and thunder rumbling rang out. He didn't make any big movements. It was as if he was flipping a page in a book. It was very natural. In that instant, it was as if Duque's hand had grasped the power of the entire world. It was as if the entire cycle of life and death was within his grasp. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The natural elemental shockwave that should have punched a few large holes in Duque's seemingly thin body instantly disintegrated and dissipated with this action of Duque's. No! Prophet Skiram shouted. In the blink of an eye, the radiance of the arcane technique lit up, and 3 identical Skirams appeared beside Duque in a triangular formation, firmly surrounding him. The 3 Skirams, whose upper bodies resembled lobsters, had fanatical expressions on their faces as they raised their claws in unison and shouted, "Go to hell!" The purple radiance of Magic Burst immediately lit up on the main body and the 2 doppelgangers. Duque laughed shamelessly. Sure enough, monsters are monsters. Or is it that those who aren't in human form have lower intelligence? Bang! Bang! The arcane energy explosion that enveloped Skiram's body suddenly stopped. The purplish-blue radiance on the three guys' bodies all rushed out uncontrollably and condensed into hundreds of arcane missiles in midair. In an instant they shot back at their own bodies. Then Mag heard bang, bang. Two shattering sounds rang out, and the two boss doppelgangers that had been bothering him for a long time exploded. Impossible. Skiram shouted. Impossible? Duque smiled. Idiot. Let me tell you. If I can't enter the divine domain as the god of magic, then I will settle for the next best thing, and become a god as the god of arcane magic. After teasing for a while, Duque didn't waste any more words and directly pointed at the index and middle fingers of his right hand. Chirp, a sound rang out. Duque's fingers seemed to extend infinitely. Of course, it wasn't that Duque's fingers became longer, but the arcane energy instantly shot out from his fingertips. It was hard to describe whether it was an arcane missile or an arcane sword. The arcane elemental light that shot out was incredibly fast, and in less than 1/100th of a second, it pierced Skiram's throat. It was clearly magic, but it was no less cold than any divine sword in the world. This was both magic and a long sword condensed from magic. The sword light was full of killing intent, and the momentum of the sword could pierce through any hard shell that wasn't protected by divinity. Clang. At the moment when Duque's long arcane sword pierced Skiram's throat, Skiram, who was a general undersea Thun, finally reacted at the critical moment. The huge red pauldrons know it should be a part of its body. The hard shell on the left and right shoulders suddenly closed. The solid shell locked the incoming sword edge so that the long arcane sword couldn't move an inch. Duque's two fingers bent slightly and then poked out again. Obviously, Duque didn't reveal any emotion, but Magni, who was next to him, had a completely different feeling. He seemed to hear the sound of a sword resounding through the world, and a terrifying killing intent surged. The pure arcane energy burst out like a flood. Duque's calmness formed a sharp contrast with Skiram's and Magni's nervousness. Clang. The long sword that seemed to have been locked a moment ago became two sharper arcane daggers in the next instant. This time the hard shell couldn't stop it anymore, and the two more agile energy daggers pierced through with unparalleled force. There was no time to dodge, let alone block. There was only a pu sound, and the two daggers pierced Skiram's throat in an instant. There were no more 50% and 25% clones left. The arcane energy that rushed into Prophet Skiram's body destroyed it like lightning, and sucked away all of its life force in one breath. Skiram's huge body, which weighed several tons, collapsed with a loud bang. Magni was dumbfounded. Duque. That's it? Duque's eyes rolled back. How long do you want to fight? I'm a demigod now after all. To deal with a leader-level creature that doesn't even have divinity, do I have to fight for a day and a night before I barely win? Are all demigods so awesome? Alright. I'll become a demigod too. Duque ruthlessly attacked Magni. Let's wait until you become a legendary hero first. Legendary heroes weren't a real level. It was purely to distinguish the powerhouses who had stepped into the realm of heroes from the powerhouses who were infinitely close to the realm of demigods. It was a level that adventurers boasted about themselves. Chapter 13:13. But the rank of legendary heroes seemed to be solidifying recently. It couldn't be helped. According to the realm of heroes, the newly promoted Valilla, Brawl, and the earlier batch of Riadaline and Lillis were all heroes. But the difference in strength between them and the oldest batch of heroes was too great. Not to mention Tyrion Fordring, the most senior Empress Dowager. Even Vanessa could easily defeat Valera. After all, Vanessa's strength was honed through countless bloody battles. Compared to Valera, who could only bully mortal gladiators in the arena or beat up small monsters, it was a completely different concept. If Vanessa hadn't been so busy recently, Valilla would have chased after Vanessa every day to ask for a duel. The same thing happened to Riadaline. She was already the most powerful paladin among the Blood Elves. Even without divine equipment, Gavin Rad still relied on the more intense holy light to take down Riadaline with one hand. And in the tavern, in the comments of the upper echelons, heroes who had experienced so many battles were unknowingly promoted to the new rank of legendary heroes. Naturally, there was a new standard for legendary heroes. Only those who could take down a divine creature alone could be considered a legendary hero. Hearing Duque's words, Magni bared his teeth. Good, good, good. There are too many things to do now. The Iron Furnace Castle needs a powerful guardian. I'll go train after defeating Thun. Duque stretched out his hand. He had wanted to take Prophet Skirim's spoils of war and leave, but the system elf suddenly gave him a notification. The soul of this creature has been detected to be compatible with the magic net. Would you like to capture it? If captured, there is a 94% chance that it can be converted into a magic net processor after purification. Huh. What kind of benefit is this? Looking at the system notification carefully, Duque decisively clicked yes. He only saw Duque's right hand pinch the air, and then a translucent spirit of Skirim was pulled out of the body by Duque. Nimble fingers flew in the air, and then Skirim's soul was shredded like a butcher dismembering an ox. The extra spider legs, shoulder armor and arms were all cut off and shattered in the void, leaving only a purple-blue soul core, which was finally taken by Duque's palm. The corners of Duque's mouth rose and he suddenly smiled bitterly, because he found that what he was doing now was almost the same as what Jaden had done to Nizul back then. However, the egg always destroyed Nizul's body and stuffed it into an ice skeleton. Duque was a bit more thorough. He completely erased Skirim's soul imprint, which meant that the miserable Skirim would no longer have any memories and would only be left with the instincts of a caster. Duque had received a system notification the moment he'd brought Cram to the Weave. Arcane Soul Compatibility Test complete. The Weave has obtained a new metamagic ability, Enhanced Magic Blast. This ability can increase the critical hit rate of Magic Blast by 10%. Holy sh*T. There's actually such a suffocating operation? Come to think of it, it made sense. Skirim had always used teleportation and Magic Blast to blast his enemies until they wished they were dead. It wasn't surprising that his soul had the ability to enhance Magic Blast. Originally, Duque had no interest in small bosses other than Thun, but now it was completely different. This was a great opportunity to collect metamagic abilities. Ever since he'd opened the Weave, Duque had suffered enough. There was no other reason, it was because he didn't earn much. It was different from what he'd imagined. Simply saving mana would not bring more benefits to Duque, but providing metamagic abilities which were more profitable value-added services, would allow Duque to fill his pockets. At this moment, Duque felt that his hobby of collecting had awakened. In the underground cave thousands of meters away, Jaina and Alicia's sudden outburst had only slightly improved the situation of the hero group. Without the entanglement of the small monsters, the hero group faced the fierce attack of Sartura again. After the Weave was forcefully expelled by Thun's power, the hero group had lost a more effective way to fight back. Under the attacks of Sartura, who charged at them like a brainless whirlwind, the team members were forced to split into two groups. One group successfully charged into the hole in midair, while the other group had to land on the ground to face the family of three. The family of three and Sartura's combination was indeed terrifying, but it wasn't much better for them to charge into the hole, because there was another boss guarding the hole. It was the fourth boss of Ankh-Karaj, the tenacious Xianxia. It had 6 legs and a trident tail. It had bright yellow skin and red stripes, and it was a commander-tier monster with the body of a scorpion. Xianxia's fighting style was quite irritating. It would constantly summon small insects and even elite sandworms to cause trouble. And it had a strong attack that could tear apart the highest-level epic armor of this era. The most disgusting thing was its teleportation. It would occasionally teleport a team member into its nest, and they couldn't do anything but take the beating of the small insects without struggling. Of course, Xianxia's problem was child's play compared to the danger below. It wasn't just the family of 3. Even the leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, had come out. This meant that the team below had to endure the crazy attacks of 5 bosses at the same time. It was obvious that there was a commander behind the scenes directing these leaders to perfectly divide and eliminate the Alliance heroes. Damn it. Gagagagu. Gavin Rad was the first to suffer. When he was the first to land on his fire eagle, he was also the first to be ambushed. The leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, suddenly jumped out from under the sand and swallowed Gavin Rad along with his fire eagle. Gavin Rad activated his invincibility almost immediately. So what? The Paladin's Holy Shield spell only lasted for slightly more than 10 seconds. Once the time was up, Gavin Rad felt like he was drowning in the corrosive mucus. If it wasn't for the fact that his entire body was filled with holy light, and the wind sword's nature attribute slightly resisted the corrosive mucus, Gavin Rad would probably have been the first to die in this battle. The scales of victory for the Alliance were still tipping in the direction of collapse. William led his men into the cave and faced Fencaris head-on. Magni stayed on the surface, and only Bulang and Theon were left to tank the boss. Due to the need of battle tactics, Riadaline had come down wearing an armor that strengthened the Holy Light spell, and she couldn't change it in time. Be careful. Before Theon could finish his sentence, Sartura had already swooped down for the kill. The claws on her 2 legs stretched out. Since she didn't manage to hook the more agile Queen Sylvia, she flapped her wings and suddenly changed her target, grabbing Kalia who was beside her. She wanted to tear Kalia in half in midair. Just then, a teleportation door appeared out of nowhere in the air behind her. Chapter 13-14. This portal that appeared in the air 50 meters in the air was not visible at all if one was not a ranger hero with the sharpest eyes. But the timing of the portal's appearance could be said to be perfect. It was the moment when Sartura raised her white veil and revealed a cruel smile as she flew. Suddenly, Sartura's smile froze on her face. The portal that appeared out of nowhere seemed to have been forcibly torn open by the fingers of countless pure white mage hands. In the purple-blue rift, a golden spiral sword suddenly stabbed out. It was the golden light that seemed like the birth of all things. It was the light of the first glimmer of dawn. It represented hope, and the banishment of evil darkness. It was impossible to avoid. Sartura, who was flying at high speed, could not avoid it at all. Ah! Accompanied by a scream, even if she twisted her body at the last moment, at least 2 of Sartura's cicada wings were cut off by the golden sword. She still wanted to pull Kalia away, but after cutting off her wings, the spiral sword's momentum suddenly changed, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. If she did not let go of her claws, her legs would not be able to move. In the choice of tearing apart an insignificant human or saving her legs, Sartura was decisively terrified. She did not even have time to increase her strength to hurt Kalia, and directly let go of her claws. Kalia screamed, and a second later she fell into an incomparably warm and familiar embrace. Ah, is that you? Is it really you? Once again narrowly escaping death, looking at Duque's familiar yet somewhat unfamiliar face, Kalia's tears easily broke the dam. She stroked Duque's face, completely unable to control herself, and began to cry. Duque gently carried Kalia in a princess hug. It was only at this moment that the spatial rift behind him turned into countless drifting fragments, and finally turned into nothingness. Looking at the battered and exhausted battle situation, in the depths of Duque's dark eyes, there seemed to be a dazzling golden flame burning. He opened his mouth and his voice shook the entire dark cave. It's the twin emperors, right? Not a bad plan. Almost caused irreparable damage to the Alliance. And almost hurt my lover. But since I'm here, then this farce should end. Get out here. Otherwise I'll kill my way to see, Thun. The buzzing in the air was a display of power, a change in the laws. The weave, which had been rejected outside the temple, once again began to crack like glass in the air. Duque showed everyone the gap between mortals and god domain experts. The first thing that entered Duque's line of sight was the sludge monster boss, Vistus, who had swallowed Gavin Rad. Gavin Rad was desperately swimming inside the ooze monster's body. Oh, it should be called struggling. Even if Gavin Rad had the strength and time to swim in there for a year, he wouldn't be able to swim out. The green mucus would surge in the opposite direction, pushing the victim back to the center. Unfortunately, Vistus was a rare monster that was immune to both soft and hard tactics. Because the ooze monster didn't have a fixed body, it couldn't take physical attacks. In essence, it wasn't an undead. What was even more ridiculous was that it couldn't even be considered an evil creature. Holy light was useless against it. In addition, it was of the nature attribute. Even the wind sword was ineffective against it. The bitter Gavin Rad was suppressed to death by it. Gavin Rad, who had experienced many battles, really wanted to kneel. Seeing Gavin Rad struggling like a nailed frog, Duque forcefully connected to Gavin Rad through the weave and communicated with him through telepathic thoughts that could transmit thousands of messages per second. Boss. Help. Gavin Rad was definitely in tears and snot. What? You can still hold on? Then I'll save the others first. Duque was up to no good and deliberately played dumb. Boss, you can't play me like this. I've been your guard for so long. Even if I don't have any credit, I've worked hard. Back then you were flirting with girls in the room and I was sitting outside drinking and drinking. Gavin Rad's voice was already shocking to the point of tears. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. Thank you for saving my life, boss. To outsiders, the telepathic thoughts communication happened in less than 1/100th of a second. Everyone only saw Duque holding Kalia in midair and attacking. Hundreds of snow-white threads of light shot out from every finger of his free left hand. At first they were just threads, but in the blink of an eye, they turned into the sharpest frost arrows, pouring down on Vista's body like a torrential rain. That's right, this sludge monster leader's biggest weakness was frost. It could not be dealt with by a simple blizzard spell but a large number of frost arrows. Only the frost arrows could easily freeze the well-hidden small cores in the sludge monster's body. If this were a game, they would have to form a large group of mage players and use a large number of frost arrows to kill this thing. Since Duque, who was a demigod and a mage demigod, was here, the other mages had nothing to do. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Suddenly, a flurry of frost arrows shot out like a snowstorm, and everyone only saw Vistas instantly freeze. The originally disgusting soft body turned into a large pile of green ice that looked like poop. In the next second, the iceberg that affected the appearance of the city cracked open with a kacha. Wah! Gavin Rad am back. On his forehead, Gavin Rad, who had the color of a grassland, waved his wind sword, like a god of war who had returned from a latrine pit, bursting out of the iceberg in anger. Sally Whitemane burst out laughing. Don't blame others for looking down on him. In fact, his dignified appearance also affected the city's appearance, and it emitted an unpleasant stench. At the same time, Duque attacked again. This time, Duque directly drew on the magic power in the magic net and used the frost element to instantly create a large iceberg, forcibly separating the family of three. When Duque turned around again, Vistas happened to explode. It was like some mischievous little brat throwing 250 kilograms of firecrackers into a latrine pit and then exploding them to his heart's content. Bang! That was awesome. Many girls were already far enough away, but now they were even more respectful. However, after witnessing the changes that happened to Vistas after he exploded, they still felt like vomiting. The huge ooze monster boss suddenly turned into 20 piles. System notification: Vistas cells are proliferating wildly. If more than 1/3 of the cells are not destroyed in a single division, Vistas will be revived with full health. Duque raised his eyebrows. 1/3? In the next second, in the system annotation, the words, divine creature, almost blinded Duque's titanium dog eyes. Faster thief. Cursing in his heart, Duque directly attacked. Chapter 13-15. In the legends before Duque transmigrated, abominations were mutated divinity monsters that were born between normal deities. There was no such thing as abominations in the world of Azeroth, because the few ancient deities themselves had a special appearance that affected the appearance of the city. A normal human would never have thoughts like tentacle control or tentacle play. Recalling the glory of the big eyeball tentacle monster from C. Thun's memory, Duque really felt that he was doing justice on behalf of the heavens by destroying these guys. At this moment, the frost elements around Duque became thousands of times more active. Countless magic arrays appeared on the magic net nodes that extended from the void beside Duque. Sharp frost arrows took shape in an instant and surged out of the magic net, raining down on the 20 disgusting green lumps of squirming on the ground. Although Vistas's cell proliferation and blood recovery plan was awesome, the price of such a huge recovery of HP was its defense. It was completely defenseless. This was purely a gamble born of biological instinct. It was a gamble on whether the enemy's attack power could surpass its recovery ability. If the frost attack was not strong enough, Vistas was an immortal existence that could not be killed. Relying on skills such as acid spit, there would always be a time when the enemy would be exhausted to death. But if the attack was strong enough, lumps of green biological tissues were eroded by the unhindered influx of frost magic. Every green cell in its body began to crystallize. Just like people with large areas of frostbite, they often needed to amputate their limbs because all the cells in the limbs had been frozen to death. The water in the cells began to crystallize, which in turn pierced through the cell walls, causing the cells to die. The 20 lumps of Vistas clones began to freeze again. It was a kind of silent wail. Even if the bystanders could not understand it, They could easily see the green mucus tissues solidifying once again. This time there was no more fragmentation or recovery. Almost every cell was directly filled with high-purity frost elements. They had lost their lives forever, let alone the ability to regenerate. Vistus was completely dead. Heh! A family of 3 not far away roared in unison. They were angry at Duque for killing their companion. Of course, Duque had no time to pay attention to this defeated dog's wail. He lowered his head and carefully examined the item in his hands. System notification. Host, you have obtained 2 basic units of Divinity of Chaos. Note, Divinity of Chaos, the power of the divine realm that is irregular. It can easily raise a creature's level and greatly increase its combat power, but its weakness is that it can easily cause a creature to enter a berserk state. If it was only at this level, Duque would definitely throw it away like trash. Fortunately, there was another sentence in the remark. Do you want to purify it? If the chaos elements are removed, it is estimated that 1 basic unit of Order Divinity of unknown attributes will be produced. Duque blinked. What basic unit? It's too much of a mouthful. Let's call it point instead. Alright, I want to extract 1 point of Order Divinity from 2 points of Divinity of Chaos. What's the price? The system elf replied, it is estimated that it will take 365 Azeroth days, and there is a 45% chance that the purification will fail, which in turn will bring adverse effects to the host. Duque understood what the system elf meant. Purification was actually a process of mutual influence. Although light and darkness were interchangeable in this world, nothing was completely pure. The more absolute a power was, the harder it was to purify it. System elf, is there anything I can do to increase the success rate? If I use a greater amount of order power to purify it, the failure rate can be greatly reduced and infinitely close to 0. The communication between Duque and the system elf's divine sense was only for a moment in the outside world, and outsiders did not even notice that Duque was in a daze. In Duque's perception, an enemy was approaching at high speed from behind. Originally, Sartura was very fast, but after she abandoned the whirlwind slash that would slow her down and added all her strength to her speed when she swooped down at high speed was quite shocking. Although many people were unwilling to admit it, it was already a little like the speed of sound. The attack arrived before the sound was heard. Unfortunately, Duque had already spread out the weave. Even if Sartura's rash charge in a straight line was faster, the elemental vibration caused by her was no different from a huge wave in the weave. How could Duque not sense it? Little Illusia was about to remind Duque, but found that Duque's figure had already become a blur. Sartura pounced on Duque's afterimage. The light that burst forth from Duque's afterimage turned into a bunch of crows that flapped their wings and cawed. The ear-piercing sound, coupled with the strange undulations in the air, instead interfered with Sartura's judgment. For a moment, no one expected Sartura to be stunned at Duque's previous position. Duque's figure appeared again, this time to her left. However, the sudden stab of the spiral golden sword was caught by Sartura's claw. The spiral sword spun at high speed in the claw, making a zzzzy sound similar to the scraping of metal from a grinder. I've caught you. Sartura suddenly laughed coldly. No, I've caught you. Duque responded with a polite smile. His smile caused Sartura to have a bad feeling. Sartura guessed correctly, but it was too late. Duque had a headache dealing with a boss with high speed and high agility like her. This was Thun's territory. It was possible to open a teleportation door here, but to use continuous flash, that was very difficult. If Sartura stubbornly avoided him and only ran to kill the other heroes of the Alliance, Duque would also have a headache. Since Sartura recklessly rushed over, Duque of course would gladly accept it. The spiral golden sword that seemed to be stuck suddenly burst forth with a golden light that was enough to blind any evil creature. Sartura instinctively wanted to run, but unfortunately in that moment of daze, the golden light had already turned into a large net, instantly covering half of Sartura's body. In the next moment, the head of a chicken leg staff was pressed against Sartura's cheek. Duque's short hair suddenly stood up along with the elemental tide that burst forth from his body. From the very end of the hair, the fire element that flowed out made Duque look like he had a head of fiery red hair. In the bright firelight, it reflected the cold expression on the face of this new demigod. Although Duque's body was already similar to many burly human males in this world, compared to her huge body he was very small, only a third of her size. But now, in everyone's perception, Duque's body seemed to have suddenly grown 100 times larger, becoming a giant that could support the heavens and the earth. His pair of eyes seemed to be made of the purest obsidian, shining brightly and incomparably deep. The terrifying power that surged like a sea of fire formed a very dazzling ball of light, making the fire element gather crazily on the head of the staff at an extremely fast speed that bystanders could not imagine. Chapter 13:16. Compress. Compress. Compress again. In just 100th of a second, this dark cave that hadn't seen the light of day for thousands of years returned to the embrace of light. Facing such a powerful enemy, not only Sartura, but every leader of Encourage felt a sense of helplessness and fear rise in their hearts. No. Sartura screamed shrilly and then did something that no one expected. She suddenly flashed and no one knew how she did it, but in order to escape she actually cut off her arm that was sealed by Duque. Not only that, a small part of the shoulder armor that was connected to her arm, yellow and green bodily fluids splattered all over the place, along with some pieces of her internal organs. She made such a huge sacrifice just for that moment of opportunity to escape. What a pity. Just as she escaped, Duque also flashed. The staff head that looked simple and unadorned like a wooden chicken drumstick, was still stuck to Sartura's face at the same distance. Not an inch more, not an inch less, still sticking close to Sartura's face. Not bad courage, too bad there's no reward. Following Duque's mockery, the demigod-level flame blast smashed out from the staff head of Atish, directly exploded at 0 distance. Ah! Sartura let out the most tragic howl since the start of the battle. Her seemingly pretty face was originally covered by a veil, but under the terrifying power of that flame blast, all of her true form had to be revealed. That was the unique mouth part of an insect creature. The 2 cockroach leg-like antennae were instantly blasted in half, and half of its face instantly caved in. Its twisted neck couldn't help but have a large area of scorch marks appear on it. If it was just a simple flame blast, it wouldn't be able to take her life. In the next moment, only the people with the most powerful eyesight could see that the flames that should have exploded in all directions gathered again under the control of Duque's astonishing elemental control. 2 consecutive attacks. It wasn't as simple as duplicating the attack twice, but rather gathering the scattered elements once again and launching another destructive attack in an extremely short amount of time on the opponents already injured and starting to be damaged. Perhaps in the eyes of those with poor eyesight, Duque instantly killed Sartura. Only those who saw this scene clearly would feel the shock of looking up to a great mountain. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The flames spread wantonly in the sky. Sartura's scorched black half-body fell heavily into the yellow sand at the bottom of the dark cave. This is the third one. Prophet Skirim, Vistus and Sartura. Then Magni, who had just come out of the portal that Duque had opened for him, muttered to himself. It was only at this moment that the Alliance powerhouses realized that as soon as Duque appeared, he had already killed 3 of Si Thun's generals. Roar. In the dark sky, the 2 beasts, Onyxia and Princess Huhuran, were fighting fiercely. The shockwaves from the clash of fire and nature elements continuously tortured the already unstable cave walls. The murals on the walls melted in the flames, and the acid that Princess Huhuran spat out splattered everywhere. More rocks collapsed and fell. The Alliance heroes who were fighting with the family of 3 had to constantly pay attention to the top of their heads to avoid being affected by this waterfall of rocks. The 2 larger bugs in the family of 3 easily caused the sand and rocks on the ground to form layers of broken waves, causing the Alliance heroes to be in a sorry state. The Rangers with light movements could still make do, but the others had to worry about whether they would fall into those ghastly cracks or be swept into the earthquake-like area. Duque didn't have the time to care about all of this. He didn't even have the time to look at what spoils of war he had gotten from killing Sartura. That was because in the darkness in the distance, 2 humanoid creatures that were 7 to 8 stories tall were charging over. Duque put Kalia down and said to Jaina, "I'll leave this to you." If it was possible, Duque naturally hoped to gather his superior forces to deal with the enemy. For example, he could leisurely take care of all the weaker leaders of the enemy, and then face Si Thun with a leisurely attitude. Unfortunately, he couldn't. In the battle between the 2 princesses in the sky, Onyxia clearly had the absolute upper hand. If he wanted her to decide the winner immediately, it would be difficult for her own mount. Rushing to decide the winner meant taking risks. Attacking recklessly was never Onyxia's forte. The Black Dragon Princess was better at using careful and continuous attacks to force the opponent into a desperate situation, and then killing them without suffering any injuries. Only when the situation was urgent and there was no other choice would Duque strictly order her to attack fiercely. So at this moment, Duque gave her a reassuring message: "Onyxia, just fight at your own pace." "Thank you, master." Duque was a demigod and one whose strength far exceeded hers. A demigod who had the chance to reach the highest position. Compared to being forced to serve a lowly human before, the current Duke made Onyxia feel better about her reputation. Being the mount of a powerful demigod sounded better than being the mount of a human. If not for the fact that they were in a fierce battle, Onyxia would have run over and taken the initiative to ask to tame a dragon. In a higher cave, half of the hero team led by Varian was fighting with the tenacious Vencaris. Obviously, the outcome would not be decided in a short period of time. It seemed that Oro's early death and the fall of Naxxramas had deeply stimulated Si Thun's side. Other than Oro and Si Thun, who was guarding the underground palace, all the leaders of Encourage who could fight were here. The two enemies who had come at this moment were naturally the twin emperors, Vecnalas the Great and Veclor the Great. Facing the twin emperors in the temple of Encourage, whose strength was second only to Si Thun, only Duque could come personally. Tyron suddenly thought of something and exclaimed, "Wait. Duque, isn't one of the twin emperors immune to magic?" Duque laughed. If someone else had asked him, he would have definitely replied, "Who do you think I am?" As Duque's lover, Tyron naturally did not need to refute. There was only a confident smile. In his left hand was the most simple and unadorned divine artifact magic staff, Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian. In his right hand was the sharp divine artifact long sword, Marcus, Song of Light and Darkness, with a peculiar spiral conical shape. Clang! At this moment the sound of the sword resounded through the 9 heavens. The spiral sword in Duque's hand suddenly became dazzling. The entire holy sword seemed to have turned into the purest light, becoming the brightest light in the world. This sword illuminated the entire hell-like underground cave of the Temple of Encourage. At this moment not only did Duque's whole body burst out with the power of a demigod, but also a surging sword intent. Duque did not say a word. His attitude said everything: "Today not just a demigod, I will even kill a god for you to see." Chapter 13-17. The Twin Emperors. They had an incomparably deep impression in Duque's memory. After all, the Twin Emperors pioneered the warlocks as tank bosses. There was no other way. Because under Si Thun's divine blessing, Emperor Veclor, commonly known as the Demon Emperor, was completely immune to physical attacks. He could only be injured by magical elements. On the other side, Emperor Veclor, who held a giant sword and was commonly known as the Sword Emperor, was completely immune to magic. The divine power wrapped around his body would instinctively expel all magical elements. So the traditional way of fighting was to have a tank with the highest armor in the team carry the Sword Emperor, and another warlock carry the Demon Emperor. Unfortunately, all the powerhouses in the Alliance hero group were in the middle of a fierce battle. There was no melee hero who could carry the monsters to help. Duque really wanted to take action again before the Twin Emperors arrived and free up some people, but unfortunately he could not. 4 gazes full of powerful divinity crossed space and darkness and locked onto Duque. He did not know what went wrong, or if the history of Azeroth had taken a further serious turn. The Twin Emperors were demigods. As long as Duque dared to run and kill the other leaders just now, the Twin Emperors dared to teach Duque a deep and unforgettable lesson. Yes, if Duque dared to go and bully the noobs, then the Twin Emperors could too. They had known each other for so long. Even Vale Era and Brawl, who Duque had the least interaction with, were regarded as partners by Duque. Duque did not want to see anyone from the Alliance hero group die. So Duque's choice was to go straight up. At this moment, Duque's sword intent was high, and his sword intent was above all living beings, suppressing the entire Zerg race. In this dark and vast sky, Duque was the strongest existence that the Twin Emperors could not avoid. The Twin Emperors stopped far away. The Sword Emperor planted his giant sword on the ground, while the Demon Emperor put his hands on his hips. They were waiting for Duque to go over. A new demigod. That chaotic place should not be a demigod's stage. Come here, a great battle needs a great stage. The twin emperors echoed each other, giving people the feeling of a two-man show. However, for a pair of brothers who had gone through thick and thin together, even sharing their life force, this kind of conversation couldn't be any more normal. The cloak on Duque's back fluttered in the wind as the elemental storm surged from Duque's body. A faint smile hung on Duque's face. At this moment, everyone could feel that they were bathed in Duque's battle intent, not in a smile. It was as if the spiral sword had replaced the sun hanging high in the sky, becoming the only source of light in this underground palace. In the next second, a wave of arcane elemental energy formed a huge wave gently lifting Duque up. In the next second, a purple-blue arcane energy warship appeared. It supported Duque's body and moved forward proudly, arriving in front of the massive twin emperors. To the left was Sword Emperor Vecnala's. On the right front was the Demon Emperor Veclor. They spoke. We are called the Twin Emperors. Sword Emperor waved the sword in his hand. I am Vecnala's. The Demon Emperor waved his staff. I am Vecnala's. We bear the same fate. From the day we were born we lived together, worked together and faced the enemy together. The true battle of the pinnacle will be sung through the ages. The human demigod powerhouse, Duke Marcus. The Emperor's modesty makes us disdain to fight two against one. You can choose a partner. This is our respect for you. This is also the respect you have for us. The words that seemed like a tongue twister didn't make Duque dizzy. Instead it made Duque see an opportunity. Duque said in a teasing tone, Huh? If I fight you two against two and we win, will there be additional prizes? Sword Emperor's glistening yellow eyes widened. The winner gets everything. The Demon Emperor's similarly colored eyes darkened. The loser loses everything. The winner's reward should not be discounted. The loser's etiquette should be done to the extreme. If you and your comrades win, you will get what you want. If I and my brother win, we will also get a real reward from Master. Duque found the Twin Emperor's wager very interesting. Unfortunately, where could Duque find a partner who could fight against the Twin Emperors? Because the Twin Emperors would heal each other when they were close to each other, Duque's partner had to be at least 60 yards away to face one of the Emperors alone. This meant that Duque couldn't choose a warrior to tank the monsters. For example, even if Magni had the Descent of God, he couldn't last that long. A real demigod was very difficult to kill in an instant. For example, when Master Howl killed the demigod Cenarius, it was ultimately because Cenarius used the forest as the source of his power. At that time, the entire Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest had already been infiltrated and polluted by demons. Cenarius' power was greatly reduced, and that was how Master Howl's shocking battle record came about. Duque knew that the Twin Emperors relied on those disgusting beetles. On Karaj, the number of insectoids was easily in the millions. His battle with the Twin Emperors was destined to be a tug-of-war. Magni definitely couldn't last that long. Duque cleared his throat. Just as he was about to say that he didn't have a partner, a graceful female figure that Duque was very familiar with stood beside Duque like lightning. Servana's Windrunner, Queen of Sindorii, Duque's partner, will partner with Duque in this battle to fight against you. Duque was embarrassed on the spot. His mouth was half open, opening and closing like a fish that had been scooped out of the water, sucking in air fiercely. She was proud. From the day Duque met her, she didn't feel that she was inferior to anyone. It was fine during the second battle at the Dark Portal. What she couldn't stand the most was during the third battle when her hometown was destroyed, but she couldn't do anything about it. Time flew, and the man who had conquered her body and mind had already become a demigod who looked down on all living things. As someone by his side, as a proud expert, as a queen who was determined to take revenge, she couldn't allow herself to stay where she was. So this time she wanted to challenge her limits. Duque's hands were trembling. Even he couldn't guarantee that he had the strength to look after Queen Shi. He really wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth he couldn't say a single word. Instead it was Queen Shi who spoke first. What? I'm not the weak Kalia. And I'm not one of those seductive sluts who swayed their lewd bodies to tempt you. From the day I was born, I was destined not to be the kind of weakling who was willing to be protected by others, and who needed to be carefully cared for. Remember, my name is Servana's Windrunner. Her sonorous and forceful words shook Duque's soul. He really wanted to argue, really wanted to forcefully hold her down and not let her do anything stupid. Suddenly Duque smiled. Chapter 13:18. Yes. This is the Sylvanus Windrunner I know. Even at the end of his life. Even at the other side of the dead. Sylvanus who never gave up fighting against fate. In Duque's harem there was obviously a hierarchy of power. Unlike Queen Sylvanus, Jaina and Tyrande who stood at the top of the mortal realm, Kalia and Alicia were lagging behind. Especially Kalia, as a greenhouse flower trapped in the Forbidden Palace in her early years, it was really difficult for her to participate in the cruel boss battles. Duque knew very well that Kalia did not want to be ostracized in the harem and become a mere flower vase or mascot. It was for similar reasons that Alicia chose to be the queen and to accompany him in battle. Queen Sylvanus, on the other hand, wanted to become stronger, hoping that she could shoulder the hopes of her fellow elves, hoping to take revenge on the scourge that destroyed her homeland. Stubbornness, resistance, and desire were the greatest motivations for her to become stronger. This was also why she chose to stand beside Duque at this moment, to fight against an enemy that she could not defeat. To be honest, Queen Sylvanus was very uneasy now. Her being here could be said to be courageous but also reckless. As a mortal god, getting involved in a battle between demigods, one mistake would lead to eternal damnation. But she was not resigned to it. Courage was like a spine. In the face of danger, if you yielded once, it was easy to do it a second time, a third time, and you would never be able to stand up straight again. Who knew when the spine of courage would break? Sailing against the current, one who did not advance would be pushed back. She could not let it go and had no reason to let it go. In her heart, Queen Sylvanus was prepared to be reprimanded by Duque, or even chased away by force. She even thought of dozens of reasons to argue with Duque. But there was no anger, no lesson. All she got was a look that said, "I understand you." Infinite gentleness and infinite trust. Not a single word. Instead he just leaned over, hugged her waist just right and kissed her gently. It wasn't the first time they had kissed, and it wasn't even the first time they had deep contact. However, this kiss made her feel like a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. It was as if she was in a dream. It was warm and full of moisture. After their lips parted and they stood up straight again, Duque and Sylvanus were no longer lovers. At this moment they were comrades. The twin emperor's glistening yellow eyes stared at Queen Sylvanus for a long time, feeling deep veneration. A peak existence among mortals. He also has extraordinary courage. We are the twin emperors. I recognize you as my opponent. Queen Sylvie held the bow in her left hand and flung her cloak with her right hand, revealing an Arather gold coin. She flicked it into the air with her thumb and said loudly, "When the coin lands," the twin emperors replied in unison, "the moment when we start fighting each other." Duque's face stiffened. "All right." The twin emperors, "Come." The golden coin kept spinning in the air. It seemed to have lost the restraints of time and kept spinning, spinning and spinning. The golden light kept flashing, but the four hearts were getting more and more nervous. After what seemed like a century, the coin finally fell to the ground, making a crisp, clang sound. The twin emperors' bodies, which were at least 7 stories tall, were like mountains toppling over, pressing down on Duque and Queen Sylvanus. At the same time, Queen Sylvanus and Duque moved at the same time and shot out like an arrow. Queen Sylvanus strode with lightning speed, and in the midst of her mad dash, she had already shot 3 arrows at the magic immune sword Emperor Vecnolus the Great. The sharp arrows drew a straight line in the air, bringing with them 3 bolts of lightning as they pierced straight at Vecnolus. Vecnolus did not even frown. The broadsword, which was as wide as the main beam of a building, came crashing down, and the light of the sword drew a strange arc in the void. Whether it was a person or an arrow, it was impossible to resist the edge of the Holy Courage greatsword. The 3 sharp arrows were about to be destroyed after a flash of the sword light. But the great emperor did not expect that Queen Sylvanus would use her left hand, which was holding the bow, to draw 3 extremely thin lines of lightning from her fingers, and actually pull the 3 arrows away from their predetermined trajectories. After the arrows changed direction in the air, they once again stabbed at Vecnolus, the emperor of the Courage Empire. Vecnolus was finally a little surprised. He did not expect that the arrows that were shot would have a second attack, especially when the arrows should have been cut down. But he still did not care. He was immune to magic, and the most powerful lightning power on the arrows was ineffective against him. Although the arrows would hit him, they might not be able to hit his vitals. If they hit his armor, it wouldn't matter. Secondly, the arrows were too small and lacked attack power. At this moment, Queen Sylvanas, in the midst of a high-speed dash, opened her left hand angrily again. The 3 arrows, which had already slowed down, suddenly sped up twice in an unscientific way. 2 arrows were shot at his eyes and 1 was shot at his throat. Vecnalas had no choice but to stop and use his left hand, which was wearing armor, to protect his vital parts with a backhand slap, and at the same time hit the 3 arrows away. And Queen Sylvanas had already taken this opportunity to shoot 3 rounds of arrows, a total of 9 arrows. She manipulated the current of the lightning, and easily let the arrows that flew out get a better angle of entry. For a moment, the arrows all drew beautiful arcs in the air, and hit the target that she wanted to shoot. Armpits, elbows, knees, ankles. Although these were protected by armor, they were still vulnerable parts with gaps, and were the targets that Queen Sylvanas wanted to hit. Years of fighting against giant-like creatures had made her give up the fantasy of killing with 1 shot. Instead, she used a more practical method, which was to paralyze the opponent as much as possible, or to weaken the opponent's movement. When all 9 arrows hit and she felt that Vecnalas's movement speed had obviously slowed down, Queen Sylvanas could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. This kind of magical second or even third stage control, Queen Sylvanas only had a success rate of more than 50% in practice. All 9 arrows hit the target. It was almost a stroke of genius, and even she did not think that she could actually succeed. But if she had to use a word to describe her mood at this moment, it was simply cool. The battle was just the beginning. The next moment, the huge Emperor Keela sword had already slashed down. Queen Sylvanas made a flexible twisting movement while moving forward at high speed, and narrowly dodged the sword. At the same time, while quickly dodging to the left, she shot another 3 arrows, one of which hit the Emperor's neck, but it was obvious that it was a muscle. For Vecnalas's thick neck, which was so thick that at least 2 people would need to wrap their arms around it, the bull-sized wound on the neck muscle was not considered serious. Chapter 13:19. The Emperor suddenly used brute force to change the direction of the giant sword and swept it horizontally. Queen Sylvanas made an extremely exaggerated backward movement, her body above her knees almost parallel to the ground, and narrowly dodged another attack. She then made 3 backflips in a row before stopping the powerful momentum. During the backflips, she shot 9 more arrows. At this time, Duque was fiercely attacking the demon Emperor Veclor. In the image transmission of the magic eyes, Duque saw that Queen Sylvanas almost had the carvings at the front of her breastplate cut off by the Sword Emperor's greatsword. Duque's face turned green. Did she really think that there would be 1 less benefit from now on? Ba. Even if Queen Sylvanas became an undead like in history, Duque would still like her. It couldn't be helped that Queen Sylvanas danced on the edge of the sword. Her greatest weapon was evasion. If she didn't appear, then Duque would have to use the mirror reality to pull the Sword Emperor. That was also a very dangerous choice. Since she was here, Duque had to believe in her. That's right, Queen Sylvanas was definitely delicate and weak compared to the 7-story Sword Emperor Veclor. She would die if she was hit by a sword. On the other hand, as long as she was focused enough and didn't get hit by a single move, it would be her victory. She alone, of course, would never be able to kill the twin emperors. Note that the lives of the twin emperors were shared. Her bow and arrows couldn't hurt them, but Duque could. After confirming once again that there wouldn't be a second existence besides him that could attract the attention of the demon Emperor Veclor, Duque went all out. The thin lines of the elemental laws crisscrossed back and forth. The 2 demigods, with their deepest understanding of elemental magic, performed a gorgeous epic duel. It was a battle of great momentum. Behind Duque, the entire sky was inverted. Countless arcane missiles poured down like a meteor shower, drawing countless dazzling parallel lines and bombarding the demon emperor. Not only that, but the weave was also expanding greedily like the beating of a heart. Every time it contracted and expanded, the area of the weave could be seen to increase. Every time the area of the weave expanded, the power of the spells blasting out of the weave would increase by 10%. Veclor's eyes narrowed. He raised his imperial courage staff high, and a huge screen of light as black as ink rose behind him, enveloping the entire hall. Shadow energy floated on the screen like grease, emitting an evil and decaying aura. At the same time he extended his withered left claw and pointed at Duque. Countless black spiritual energy beams shot toward Duque's arcane missiles. The Demon King Emperor Veclor was also a super expert who was proficient in many types of magic. The arcane magic, wide area magic burst technique, was also one of his specialties. However, after the spellcasters entered the demigod realm, the way they fought would naturally change drastically. Just like how it was impossible to burn Ragnaros to death with fire, Veclor similarly could not use arcane magic to kill a demigod whose core was arcane magic, even if it was a newly advanced demigod. With a thought, the countless beetles on the ground began to approach Duque, intentionally or unintentionally. Duque sneered. Self-destructing bug? Can't you be a little more creative? In his previous life as a player he obviously did not have the ability to deal with beetles that would constantly respawn and never finish killing. In this life as a true demigod of Azeroth, he had plenty of ways to deal with the Demon King. As expected, a bug that was originally only the size of a palm suddenly grew rapidly under Veclor's infusion of magic. In the blink of an eye, it became a giant the size of a carriage. Bang! The bug exploded. What splashed out was not flames like in history, but extremely corrosive acid. Duque revealed a playful smile. Duque did not need to do anything. In the weave, dozens of burly figures wrapped in raging flames rushed out. Fire demon guards. Manager Majordomo Executus thugs and meat shields. Now that Majordomo Executus had become Duque's elemental emissary and was in charge of managing the weave, his underlings naturally became part of the weave. In the Molten Core the fire demon guards were more like pure, strong warriors, but here they were more like Balrogs from the scorching hell. However, their skin was still crimson, not golden red like the Balrogs. They were also covered in blazing flames, looking quite formidable. To be honest, Duque did not have much hope in the combat power of these fire demon guards. Since the Demon King was harassing him with cannon fodder he could not focus on dealing with them. All the command was handed over to Majordomo Executus, who had integrated with the weave. However, after the fire demon guards became purer elemental creatures, they were really powerful. They could actually drive all the bugs, big or small, out of a radius of 30 meters around Duque. Humph! Veclor looked unhappy. Suddenly, those big beetles were no longer simple self-destructing bugs. They became the size of rhinoceroses and their bodies emitted pink crystal light. Dozens of crystal beetles rushed up and fought evenly with the fire demon guards. Oh! With a thought from Duque, a modified version of the fire elemental jumped out of the illusory weave. On the surface this was a fire elemental bathed in fire. However, there was a huge change in body shape. It was the Balrog from the Lord of the Rings world where the White Sword Saint Gandalf was. With the appearance of a demon, the Balrog was good at using whips and beheading swords. Roar! This Balrog, which did not exist in the world of Azeroth, stabbed the flaming sword in its right hand into the ground as soon as it appeared. With this action, brilliant flames suddenly rose from the void, followed by magma pouring out of the void on the spot. Many golden rivers hung upside down in the void, lighting up the entire Twin Emperor's Hall. Spreading along the golden beam of light, even the ground began to turn into a state of melting magma. Every crystal beetle that was touched immediately emitted a zzz sound, which made one's hair stand on end when they heard it. The defenses of these crystal beetles that were specialized by Veclor were extremely frightening. A single pillar of lava fire couldn't even melt their outer shells, but as 2, 3 and even more pillars of lava fire condensed into lava spears, the high temperature and sharpness combined into one body, the only outcome for these sturdy monsters was to shriek as they turned into a pile of charcoal. The golden light of the fire illuminated the face of Emperor Veclor. He finally realized how difficult it was to deal with the newly promoted demigod standing in front of him. In terms of the total amount and quality of magic, Duque was not inferior to him, a veteran demigod. In terms of multicasting and the strength of his generals, he was also superior. In Duque's weave, more kinds of attack magic began to emerge, breaking through the obstruction of the shadow arrow rain and hitting the magic shield of the Demon Emperor. Chapter 1320. The Demon King waved the Courage Imperial Staff as his mind worked rapidly, thinking about the situation. The situation was clear now. His brother Vecnalas had the absolute advantage against Servanas and was constantly pressuring him. On the other side, in the elemental domain, he was severely restricted by Duque, who specialized in 3 elements and had decent strength in the other 3. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before he was defeated. The current situation was a bit like an Ouroboros. The snake head at the back wanted to devour the snake tail at the front, and whoever devoured it faster would be the winner. Was it Vecnalas who killed Servanas first? Or would Duque exhaust them by attacking him first? In the end, he made a decision. It was a cruel order. Hundreds of insects grew in size at once. They had all sorts of characteristics. Some were filled with fire elements, some were frost, and some were acid. These insects ignored the attacks of the fire demon guards and Balrogs, and charged at Duque, who was standing in the air on an arcane throne of energy. Unexpectedly, even though the formation had been penetrated, not a single fire demon guard left the front line. They even ignored the pursuit and continued to attack the beetles within their attack range. In the weave, a new elemental creation appeared. This time it was a giant surrounded by thunder and lightning. In the name of Thaddeus, I declare that no existence can surpass me and attack my master. This thunder giant, who had the appearance of a holy knight, snapped his fingers, and a large number of beetles that had charged through the line of defense suddenly jumped out of nowhere. After a series of thunderous explosions, the entire world became quiet. Vecnalas didn't even frown, and directly let more beetles burrow out of the cracks in the ground. They kept charging, growing larger, and pounced at the continuous line of fire and thunder. It was hard to say if this scene was tragic or cruel. These creatures, born in the darkness and raised as weapons, were like moths at this moment, rushing wave after wave towards the impenetrable line of defense. Their lives seemed cheap and pitiful. But as long as they could successfully obstruct Duque's casting for a moment, in the eyes of the twin emperors, their lives had meaning. Vecnalas began to cast a spell. It was a spell completely different from attack magic. Teleportation. If there were no accidents, the twin emperors would immediately swap the 2 brothers. The sword emperor, who was immune to magic, would come to Duque, while the demon emperor, who was immune to physical attacks, would go against Servanas. Humph. Duque snorted coldly, and a fireball the size of a small sentry tower smashed into Veclor's body. The flames instantly burned through the demon emperor's left shoulder armor. Not only the armor, but almost half of his left shoulder was burned to ashes. However, he didn't seem to be in pain. He just smiled as if he was announcing his victory. In Duque's spirit sea, the demon king transmitted this message. Master said that only existences that are allowed to teleport in his sacred land can exist. Duque shuddered. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to. Stepping into a true god's territory was like stepping into their domain. See Thun's berserk divine power wantonly spread throughout the entire Ankh-Karaj temple. Expanding the magic net for Duque was a very, very strenuous task. It was obviously a thankless task. Duque had to do this, or else he would be cut off from all power in the outside world. As a newly ascended demigod, Duque's own divine power reserves and magic reserves were definitely the lowest. He had just constructed the prototype of the magic net when he was forced to join the battle. If his source of magic and the support of the magic net were blocked, then Duque wouldn't be much different from an ordinary Breaking Dawn archmage. At most, he would just be a little tougher. Fortunately, Duque grasped too many types of elements. Even Si Thun couldn't expel all 6 of Duque's major elements. This was like patching. If it was 1 or 2 holes, it would be easy to patch, but if it was a wicker basket full of holes, then what the hell was there to patch? So no matter how hard Si Thun tried to suppress him, Duque still expanded his magic net bit by bit, whether it was the total amount of magic or the volume of the magic net itself. But Si Thun could completely mess up the spatial coordinates of the temple. At this moment, Duque couldn't feel any clear spatial coordinates. The next moment, Emperor Veclor was about to switch places with his brother. At this moment, Duque didn't even bother to show the slightest bit of nervousness on his face. It was just that his left hand was still tightly gripping the divine artifact magic staff, Atish, which was somewhat famous even among the Kiraj insect people. You're just bluffing. Veclor snorted disdainfully. He had already thought about how he was going to torture that jumping female elf after the teleportation. The surrounding images suddenly blurred. This was the inevitable situation of teleportation. But a second later the Nephilim king was stunned. Duque hadn't been left behind by him at all. Duque had completed a successful teleportation just like him. This wasn't a simple thing. After Si-Thun had mixed up almost all the spatial coordinates here, any teleportation or flash was an extremely high-risk gamble. If he wasn't careful he would get stuck in the pillars of the temple or even in some unknown spatial rift and be done for. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Ah!" He never dreamed that Duque would be so decisive. What he really couldn't understand was how Duque had located the spatial coordinates. Duke smiled and with a flying kick he kicked the dumbfounded Queen Xi's buttocks. The surging arcane elemental energy sent Queen Zeline flying towards Sword Emperor Vecnulf, who was 100 meters away. "Duque, you bastard." Queen Sylvanas was a little exasperated. Duque clearly had a better way but he chose to do this. Was this humiliation? Or was it flirting? Regardless of that, the Sword Emperor's sword light fell again, and Queen Sylvanas had to focus on dodging and counterattacking again. On this side, the Nephilim king only got a contemptuous smile from Duque. "My flames are my lighthouse in the void." In response to Duke's words, Veclor's charred left shoulder, which had already been completely extinguished, once again ignited with a blazing red flame. The raging flames surged incessantly along his arm, spreading to his left elbow and the left side of his neck in an instant. He had underestimated his enemy. He didn't think that Duque's manipulation of the elements was so high. In his impression that should be the means of the fire demon king Ragnaros. Who knew that Duque could be like a phoenix, giving birth to flames from ashes again, burning the enemy's body a second time, and once again turning it into an accelerant for the rolling flames. Vecnul's expression finally changed and he felt anxious. Chapter 13:21. They were both demigods but the gap was so huge. Duque was clearly just a newly minted demigod, but his proficiency in using power was above him. Although their domains were different and strictly speaking, Duque was a demigod mage for humans and elves, while Veclor was a demigod mage for the Karaj insect people. There should not be such a gap. Veclor could not help but look at the seemingly inconspicuous wooden staff in Duque's hand. An extremely rare space-type magic staff? For a new demigod to have such wealth, even Veclor was secretly envious of him. "Fine. After I kill you, your staff will be my spoils of war." The Karaj insect people were the model race of the strong preying on the weak. At this moment Veclor looked at Duque with a bit more greed and jealousy. Humph. Veclor exploded all the shadow elements he had accumulated in one breath, and the dark shadow elements easily extinguished the flames on his body. "Yo, what? Want to call your brother over?" Duque teased the Demon King. "We don't need both of us to deal with you." Veclor's face turned cold. To be honest, the twin emperors attacking together was a bit troublesome. They would heal themselves at every turn, and Duque was not sure if he could successfully use counterspell on the twin emperors. Duque had his own confidence. Glancing at the needle on the gadget in his hand, Duque laughed in his heart, and began to focus most of his attention on Queen Sylvanas. Queen Sylvanas worked very hard. It was rare that after fighting for so long her rhythm was not messed up at all. Every time he dodged it was just right. He didn't spend too much energy and every time he dodged even if it was just 1 millimeter. She would never let herself be in the dangerous splash range. At the same time she would never let herself expend too much energy. This kind of exquisite, almost scalpel-level movements could only be done by someone who used her agility to the extreme. Among the 4 Windrunner sisters, if there was one who had the best chance of breaking through to the level of demigod, it would definitely be Sylvanas. Lilith's talent was too poor. Reaching the hero domain was already her limit. Sasha was very talented, but it was a pity that she was too kind. In terms of talent, Aurelia was on the same level as Queen Sylvia. The problem was that she often considered too much when faced with problems. She cared too much about the big picture and this weakness limited her on the path of battle. Only Sylvanas, with her unyielding spirit, successfully acted out what it meant to be a rebel of fate. He was unwilling to be left behind. She was not willing to be a good wife and mother. She was not willing to be a country's mascot, a vase in a duke's mansion. It was because of so much unwillingness that she became who she was now. In order to break through to the demigod realm, other than Duque, who had the help of the system elf to cheat, or Medivh, who was a freak with extraordinary talents, The best whetstone was to fight a real demigod in a battle of life and death. Although it was dangerous under such circumstances, breaking through was the fastest and most likely. Now it seemed that she had done a good job. But Vekler wasn't good. His magic was suppressed by Duque, and this was when Duque was clearly distracted. Logically speaking, any distraction or carelessness during a battle with Pharaoh would be fatal. This was because it could affect the elemental guidance or the arrangement of incantations, and could even destroy a forbidden spell, blowing himself up before killing the enemy. But Duque was a weirdo. With his mind on his sister, his left hand held a tish and continued to guide the elemental guidance, while his right hand made the casting gestures without the slightest bit of confusion. Even more shamelessly, he pulled out more things from the magic net. A replica of the curator, made entirely of arcane elements, appeared. With the earth as armor and pure arcane energy as his body, this curator used a continuous rain of arcane missiles to clear a large wave of beetles as soon as he appeared. It wasn't just him. There was also a smaller frost dragon made of the purest frost elements. It appeared out of thin air, facing the Demon King's shadow arrow rain head-on, and opened its mouth to spit out an ultra-pure frost dragon breath. The benefits of Duque's split control were vividly displayed at this moment. As long as he could still connect to the magic net, the 6 elemental emissaries could command various elemental creatures from a safe place to attack Duque's enemies through the magic net. On the contrary, the Demon King Vekler could only rely on himself. Damn! After a furious roar, the Demon King changed tactics. Those large-sized beetles no longer blindly rushed to their deaths. More and more beetles began to climb onto his huge but seemingly skinny body. Duque narrowed his eyes. There was an indescribable feeling in them. As expected, a change had come. Although he didn't know how they got their human forms, Duque could be sure that, at least in this world of Azeroth, the twin emperors were the emperors of the Karaji insect people empire. The emperor of the insects, of course, wouldn't be human. So the twin emperors were also insects. All the little insects not only worshipped their emperors, but were also willing to give up their lives. The insects that turned pink were crystallized. They greatly increased the hardness of their bodies. The ones that turned white were ice elemental, yellow were fire elemental, and violet were arcane elemental. Duque had never imagined that Vekler could use such a miraculous method to forcefully increase his physical defense and elemental absorption ability. Originally, in terms of communication with the elemental realm, Duque was far ahead of Vekler. Now the Demon King had obviously pulled this gap to a point where it wasn't too great. As a price, Vekler's body was already huge enough. After thousands of insects climbed up, his body grew even taller, becoming as tall as a 10-story building. Queen Sylvanas naturally noticed the changes here. She only glanced over and her whole body quivered. That's right. Thousands of wriggling insects were climbing up, even biting and devouring each other. This scene, this sound was challenging the limits of a woman's senses. Queen Sylvanas didn't have the luxury to pay attention to the Demon King, and she firmly believed that Duque could handle it better than her. On the other side, looking at Vekler, the Demon King, turning himself into a fortress-like existence, Duque was a little dumbfounded. Bastard! You're forcing me to use my ultimate move. I originally wanted to leave it for your master. Duque seemed to say this without rhyme or reason. At first, the Demon King was very nervous. Who knew that a minute had passed, 2 minutes had passed, 5 minutes had passed. Even after the Gemini swapped positions 10 times, nothing happened. Duque took advantage of his elemental purity and continued to attack like a tidal wave, killing Vekler's insects wave after wave. However, Vekler used the insects' lives to fill in the gaps, using insect lives to buy time and fighting evenly with Duque. Chapter 1322. Just as Emperor Vekler was praying for his brother to kill Sylvanas first, suddenly the entire Karaj temple shook violently. It was like an earthquake. The feeling of the earth shaking even affected this 1,000-meter-deep underground cave. How exaggerated was this? Unfortunately, all the Karaj insect people were no strangers to this feeling. Because it wasn't the first time. The last time it was so shocking was when Naxxramas crashed into the east side of the Karaj temple. It fell back and forth, or rather, it was repeatedly thrusted, turning that side into ruins. Could it be that the alliance threw Naxxramas in again this time? Impossible! The twin emperors exclaimed at the same time. Their master Si Thun would never let Naxxramas behave atrociously in his territory again. In fact, Naxxramas was really close to the Karaj temple again. This time was different from the past. This time the floating fortress was purely a feint. Seeing that his old enemy was coming again, how could Si Thun keep his face? Without saying a word, he first used a moving death ray. Different from the time of Kel Thuzad, under Duque's orders, the dwarven craftsman carried out emergency modifications to Naxxramas. The biggest difference was the addition of a set of 12 large screw engines. Although this thing didn't have much effect on accelerating the entire fortress, at a critical moment, a difference of 1 meter was the difference between life and death. Moreover, the main control system of the fortress was linked to the magic net. After the warning system detected the high-energy reaction rising from the Karaj temple in advance, Duque directly calculated the shooting range of Si Thun's light cannon and let the fortress evade in advance. Just like this, Naxxramas narrowly avoided Si Thun's ultimate move. And the feint attack was to cover for another star fall. He didn't believe that Si Thun could fire such a terrifying light cannon continuously. Under Duque's instigation, the dragons brought down another abandoned giant ship of the Burning Legion as a meteorite. In the dark starry sky, a red line of fire stabbed down diagonally. The clouds were boiling like porridge. From afar it looked like a huge marshmallow cloud. Suddenly, a red dot appeared in the middle, like a stone falling into water rippling on the clouds. Then the clouds were dyed fiery red. The next moment, under Tyron's guidance, the fiery red warship fell to the ground. It accurately hit the place where the entrance of the Karaj shrine should have been. If the first collapse that trapped the Alliance hero group was deliberately done by the twin emperors, then the bombing this time was Duque taking advantage of the situation. The opening, which was not very big in the first place, was forcibly torn open in the direction of the palace where the twin emperors were. The earth was collapsing and the hard rocks were easily torn apart. Countless rocks fell from the shocking crack at the entrance of the temple, once again setting off a terrifying man-made earthquake. After the violent collapse, Lor suddenly discovered that he could see the sky. Originally, the entire palace was a typical underground cave. Now that the entire dome had collapsed, they could naturally see the sky. At this moment, Lor, who was observing the skies, saw a resplendent golden light shine in the skies above. Normally, if it wasn't noon, there wouldn't be any sunlight that could reach the bottom of the deep cave. This light was obviously man-made. Even if Lor died, he wouldn't know that at this moment, in the orbit of the planet above Karaj, there was a reflector made from a crystal mirror that was about 2 kilometers long and wide. This was naturally a product of black technology that Duque had asked the dragons to do. Sunlight itself didn't have any direct destructive power, but with the help of Alonso's Veil's magic net and the processing of forbidden spells, sunlight had become the most terrifying weapon of mass destruction. An incomparably thick golden pillar of light descended from above the clouds, piercing through the entire world. The clouds had long been swept away by the meteorite, but now, under the influence of the holy magic, they slowly rotated to form a whirlpool. The golden pillar stabbed downwards, landing straight into that gigantic crack. The resplendent golden light reflected in Duque's dark eyes fell along the walls of the cave. With a confident smile, the golden light penetrated deep into the ground, and began to converge at the end, focusing on the body of a certain emperor whose body had become even larger. Boom. Continuous golden light spread from Lor's raised head to every corner of his body. Every bug that possessed Emperor Lor's body seemed to swell up before exploding. This time it wasn't because they were obeying the emperor's orders, but because the elements on their bodies were in conflict with it. That's right, in order to avoid Duque's edge, Lor had chosen to use the shadow element as his core. Suddenly receiving the strongest attack of the holy element, not a single beetle could withstand the tearing of these two opposing forces. Flesh and blood flew everywhere and more tentacles, mouthparts, shells and thorny limbs exploded into the air. As the golden light spread further, it was like a sharp knife cutting open a wrapping paper. Immediately, the true body of the demon emperor Lor was revealed to Duque and Queen Sylvanas. The once arrogant and skinny Lor had lost his humanoid appearance. What appeared before Duque was an extremely ugly, twisted bug. Overall, he looked a little like a silkworm with countless sharp, thin and stubby little legs. but a closer look would reveal that each of his legs was a beetle's mouthpart, and each spot on his body was a living beetle's eyeball. Emperor Weak Lore was more like a monster made of countless bugs intertwining with each other. Fortunately, in less than half a second after Weak Lore's glory was revealed, Alonso's soul directly descended beside Duque. His full strength caused this disgusting scene to become extremely brief. Amidst an earth-shattering, inhuman scream, that giant bug amalgamation suddenly exploded. Every single tentacle, every single horn, and every single hair that was like steel needles completely exploded apart and transformed into specks of powder that were the size of ordinary ants. In the end, they didn't even have the time to flutter down before they had already dispersed within the golden radiance. On the other side, the sword Emperor Vecnalis's triple slash had almost forced Sylvanas into a dead end. At this moment, the sword Emperor's huge body suddenly shrunk rapidly. In a short 3 seconds he had become an empty bag of skin collapsing on the ground. In the surroundings, all of the bugs wandering about on the ground died. They exploded one after another as if a rain of blood had fallen. Sylvanas turned his head and saw Duque standing proudly within the golden light. His expression was normal and his black pupils were accompanied by a light smile. It was as if what he had just killed were not 2 demigods but 2 ants. Chapter 1323. He died just like that. Queen Sylvanas' face was still frozen in disbelief. Did we win? Duque smiled as he walked over and hooked Queen Sylvanas' little nose. In order to fight against my elemental advantage, Lore almost changed the attributes of his entire body to shadow. He was gambling on the fact that there was no strong direct sunlight in this dark underground palace. Obviously he bet on the wrong bet. Queen Sylvanas was stunned for a moment before a bright smile blossomed on her face. You master tacticians are all despicable. Duque was speechless. In history, Queen Sylvanas was a ruthless person who had no choice but to max out her talent in scheming. It was fine to be mocked by anyone but Queen Sylvanas. Duque was a little displeased. Wasn't this the same as a certain master tactician mocking others? You guys are all dirty. I'm not going to take the blame for this. Alright. I'm just a little regretful. My great hero, you can't be so petty. As she spoke, 2 fair arms had already wrapped around him. On her perfect smiling face, her long and curly eyelashes had already drooped. With such benefits, all of Duque's complaints disappeared. He decisively went up to taste Queen Sylvanas' little tongue. After an unknown period of time, the 2 of them were awakened by the sound of footsteps from afar. You guys are having fun. There were still beads of sweat on Aurelia's temples as she rushed over. Evidently, she had rushed over after fighting the family of 3. Of course, as the eldest sister of the Fengxing family, she would only pretend to be angry when she saw this scene. Behind Aurelia were the other members of the hero team. No one would blame Duque for not coming over to help after the fight. Duque had already fought the strongest enemy. If they couldn't even deal with an ordinary leader, they wouldn't be qualified to stay in the hero team. The battle on William's side was the last to end, and it was rather pathetic. Many of them had sustained injuries that were neither light nor heavy. What made him feel even worse was that Xianxia had actually run over to ask if he needed help after getting rid of Princess Huron. On the surface she seemed to be well-intentioned, but from the tone of the Princess of the Black Dragon's teasing tone, it was clear that she would help as long as William asked. However, it was unknown if she would say something behind his back. William didn't reply immediately. Instead he asked about everyone's situation. When he found out that his group was the last to fight, he made an interesting choice. He wanted Xianxia to hold the line, but he wanted the members in the cave to rely on their own strength to finish off the tenacious Vancaris. Looking at the battered William and the rest walking towards him, Duque nodded slightly. William took the initiative and said, "I'm sorry, it seems like I made the wrong choice. Because of my decision, the Alliance's hero team was nearly wiped out." Duque shook his head. No, there is no right choice in this world. The so-called correctness was just a theory of results. In that chaotic situation, since Magni wasn't around and you took over the command and made the choice, you are a qualified leader. Actually, I'm quite curious. Why didn't you accept Xianxia's help just now? William had a strange expression on his face. If the situation was dire, I would, even if she was said to be a sinister black dragon who would betray us at any time. Onyxia snorted coldly behind Duque. If it was her master or someone else, I wouldn't be at ease with her. Since it was Uncle Duque, the savior of Stormwind, I definitely approve of your decision. Moreover, the situation was already stable at that time, so I would rather let everyone have a better experience. A wise choice, Duque praised sincerely. You're starting to become an outstanding leader. William nodded humbly. Thank you, Uncle Duque. Actually, I would like to consult you, who is known as the greatest strategist in the history of the Alliance. What's a better way to break the other party's conspiracy? As an elder, Duque explained to William in detail. When the other party has obviously set up a trap as a leader, the first thing to do is to make a decisive decision. Being overcautious and not doing anything is the worst. As long as you make a decision, even if it's a wrong decision, it's better than doing nothing and letting the team follow the other party's ideas and let the situation develop. Duque continued, be it strategy or tactics, they are all psychological games. There was no such thing as an absolute mental model. If you have a deeper understanding of the enemy, but the enemy doesn't know anything about you, then you've already won half of the battle. Then, Uncle Duque, why are you always able to use all kinds of exaggerated methods to deal with the enemy? That's because I'm a transmigrator. Cough cough. Duke lectured with a straight face. I have always used strange ideas to defeat my enemies because I have jumped out of the enemy's way of thinking. At the same time, I have a broader vision than the enemy. That's why I can always win. I've never been the most outstanding one. I'm only a little better than the enemy. I also know that what I lack the most is experience, but since my subjects have high expectations of me, I want to avoid detours as much as possible. Do you have any good ideas or good guidelines? You don't say. There really is. I found this rather interesting book on the art of war in Mediva's library. I'll give it to you today. I hope you can read it and read it thoroughly. With that, the sage-like Dumuk solemnly took out an ancient book that had been specially dyed yellow with soy sauce, washed and dried. What book is this? William's eyes widened. Under the watchful eyes of Valilla and Brawl, he caressed the cover and slowly opened the first page. He looked at the strange square words and was extremely confused. Oh, I forgot that you don't know any languages other than the common language and Darnassus. For this day I've prepared my translation for you. Duque took out a newly written translation in the common language. Sun Tzu's Art of War. How to get more grandchildren. First, you have to find 100 beauties who are willing to have children with you. Give birth to 1,000 children and then... Before William could finish reading, Duque snatched the book back at lightning speed. You're mistaken, this is the book. Duque took out another translation of Sun Tzu's Art of War. He could clearly feel more than 10 shy and angry gazes from all around him. War is a matter of great importance to a country. It's the land of life and death, the path of survival. It must be examined. Although it was a little hard to understand after William read it out, it was more than 100 times more pretentious in an instant. Chapter 1324. Sun Tzu's Art of War was a top-notch work that revealed the laws of competition. It displayed novel concepts that had never been seen in the world of Azeroth. When a series of profound strategic concepts such as using intelligence to conquer strength, using softness to conquer strength, and winning without fighting were displayed, William was quickly engrossed in it. At the same time, the profound philosophical concepts of using virtue to subdue people, and the unity of man and nature, made William even more mesmerized. Before Duque traveled to this world, the influence of this masterpiece had far exceeded the borders of the country. Many famous foreign strategists were intoxicated by the broad and profound traditional strategic culture of China. Not only did this masterpiece transcend national boundaries, but it also transcended time and space. As British Air Marshal John Slessor said in China's military maxim, "What's fascinating about Sun Tzu is how amazingly up-to-date his ideas are." By changing some of the words slightly, his maxim seems to have been written yesterday. This masterpiece was no longer simply a work of war. It had become a must-read for leaders in the fields of politics, economics, and diplomacy. Sun Tzu's ideas were not only widely used in the modern military field, but also in politics, economics, diplomacy, and sports. For such a godly book, which had been explained in detail by Duque in the common language, William was almost instantly sure that this was the legendary Holy Bible. Looking at this Holy Bible, William's slight disappointment from making the wrong choice was immediately swept away. His eyes contained a brighter light than before, as if there was a raging flame burning in them. Unknowingly, Magni had also come over, and even the other kings had come over to watch. It was only when Duque slapped William and Magni's shoulders that they snapped out of it. "All right. Thun is not dead yet. Let's retreat first." If it was in the past, William would have asked Duque why they didn't just kill him in one go. However, the concepts of retreating in order to advance that he had just seen had strongly stimulated William's thoughts. The higher-ups of the alliance quickly reached a consensus to retreat first. Since they were allied forces, challenging the ancient god Thun was a huge matter. They would definitely go through thick and thin together. Even with a demigod like Duque overseeing things, there was still no guarantee. After all, no one knew to what extent Thun's strength had recovered, but from the 2 attacks Thun made, one of which sent Naxxramas flying and the other of which blew up a small part of Naxxramas, it was clear that the power of this ancient evil god was not complete. Of course, the alliance could directly charge into the lowest level of the Ankh-Karaj temple without waiting for the tribes. He might even be able to take advantage of Thun before he fully recovered. But so what if he won? They might be able to obtain some decent equipment, but who could guarantee that the alliance's experts wouldn't die? It was precisely because the alliance was stronger than the Horde in terms of both quantity and quality of experts, as well as national and military power, that the alliance was able to form an allied army. If the alliance sacrificed too much, it would only benefit the Horde. William suddenly understood why Duque wanted to retreat first. Duque smiled and turned to Jaina. "Go out and inform the vanguard of the allied army to retreat immediately from the Wall of Beetles to the Divine Temple. At the same time, prepare to use continuous artillery fire 24 hours a day to cover the road from the Wall of Beetles to the Ankh-Karaj ruins." Almost as soon as the Alliance heroes returned to Naxxramas, the most terrifying insect swarm on record broke out in the Ankh-Karaj temple. Damn it! It's here again. On the floating fortress, all kinds of chaotic sounds drowned out everything. The sound of orders, angry curses, and then the loudest sound of artillery fire rang out. No one could figure out whether the sound of the artillery had alarmed the swarm, or whether the swarm had attracted the artillery fire. Almost at the same time as the artillery shells rained down on the Ankh-Karaj temple, insects the size of small trucks rushed out from every corner of the temple with their fangs and claws bared. They were like a black carpet that covered the entire ground, dyeing the yellow earth into a creepy, constantly shaking black color. They rushed out of the temple and formed a huge wall that was like a wave. They rushed forward crazily and quickly, even ignoring the cries of their companions. They stepped on their companions that ran slower to the bottom. Whether or not they would be trampled to death, no one knew. Originally, Varrock Salyafar didn't want to retreat because retreating meant that the Horde heroes led by Sal would be cut off. However, Duque's words dispelled his thoughts. "Varrock, I don't doubt your loyalty to the chief at all, but it's not like you haven't seen an insect swarm before. How long do you think your army can last in front of this tide? Do you want to kill the last elites of the Horde? And as long as we kill all the insects, we can still get Sal and the others back. Don't worry, as long as Thun isn't beaten back to the depths of the planet, the interests of the Alliance and the Horde will be the same." Varrock was silent for a few seconds and finally nodded. The Horde retreated. The Alliance, with the convenience of Naxxramas, crazily opened fire on every aisle in the direction of the Ankh-Karaj temple, every place that wasn't under the protection of Thun's power. The insects were charging without any regard for their own lives, and the Alliance's artillery was also covering the area. The swarm of insects that was originally like a surging black tide didn't even have time to form an interweaving turbulence before it was smashed to pieces by the Alliance's superior artillery. The entire world seemed to be filled with the light of the explosions. As the cannon king of the Alliance, Bulang Bronzebeard methodically commanded Naxxramas. 4 ground attacks, prioritize the incendiary bombs, then the explosive bombs. For air attacks, don't stop the 3 types of bombs. Don't be afraid to run out of bombs. Sir Duke Marcus is already a demigod for mages. He will open a portal for us to replenish our ammunition. In the command center, after letting Khadgar help with the matter of the portal, Duque's focus fell on another place. He said to Varrock and Magni, "See? The range of Si Thun's power shield has shrunk." Yes. The two nodded at the same time. Originally, Si Thun could cover the entire Ankh-Kiraj temple, but now it only covered the main hall of the temple. Other places, even if stray bullets flew over, it didn't matter. Why is that? Varrock was puzzled. Because our Alliance's hero squad first broke the pillar of the Ankh-Kiraj temple. Duque raised his palm and two souls that looked like little people appeared on his palm. Even though these two souls had been imprisoned by Duque, Varrock could still clearly feel the strong will and surging soul waves from these two souls. This is the souls of the twin emperors. The emperor of the Kiraj insect people and also the leader of the swarm. After losing them, Si Thun could no longer control the Kiraj insect people well, so he simply sent all the low-level insects to their deaths. Chapter 1325. To be honest, even Duque wasn't sure if the Kiraj insect people were Si Thun's biological sons. After all, in terms of race, they wouldn't even be able to pee in the same pot. The most common explanation was that when the Titans discovered Azeroth, the entire surface of the planet was about to be corrupted by the four ancient gods. The Titans were furious. After the boss of the Pantheon, Amonthel, personally destroyed the most powerful Yashaji, the Titans discovered that the ancient gods had already corroded the planet deeply. Killing the ancient gods would cause great damage to Azeroth. For the sake of Azeroth, a powerful Titan in the future, they created guardians and sent them to seal the ancient gods in Azeroth. However, these ancient gods didn't obediently give in. They were still hatching plans in the underground of Azeroth, ready to rule the world again at any time. Si Thun was defeated and sealed in a battle in Silithus. However, with the loss and confusion of the Guardian Liden, as well as the earth-shattering explosion and impact of the Well of Eternity, the Guardian's seal gradually weakened. He reappeared as the mastermind behind the Kiraj insect people. However, in all historical documents, only the Kiraj insect people were mentioned as Si Thun's servants. According to Si Thun's crazy personality, since he wanted to stall for time to recover from his injuries, servants were probably existences that could be abandoned at any time. At this thought, Duque had a new idea. Bu Lang, when this wave of insects is over, use the zero cannonball. Bu Lang replied. Zero cannonball? William was curious. There are many plants in this world that are more or less poisonous to insects. The most widely used ones are pyrethrum, rhotina, and tobacco. The so-called zero cannonball is to cultivate a large number of these plants, grind them into powder and then shoot them near the insect nest. As for how effective it is, it will have to be tested to know. Anyway, there are a lot of materials in the Ungoro crater in the east, Duque replied indifferently. It didn't matter if there was no effect. If there was a special effect in the test, it would be worth it. Although Si Thun didn't care about the insects, the Alliance and the Horde did. Even if they killed Si Thun, there might be another insect wave and the whole of Kalimdor would have to kneel. It was not possible to form such a magnificent coalition army every time. As a transmigrator, Duque knew that Azeroth was full of trouble. William nodded heavily. I've learned a lot. After settling the chores, Duque came to the strange little space attached to Naxxramas. This place, which used to be the Frost Dragon's lair and the Temple of Kal-Thazad, had now become the core area of the stronghold. Unlike the main control area, this core area was mainly used to store valuables and serve as a refuge for VIPs. Thanks to the promotion of mold-based house construction, while the logistics force was busy transforming Naxxramas's defense and firepower, Du had the time to recruit a group of Storm City's Mason Brotherhood craftsmen to work on his own. It wasn't an exaggeration to build an exquisite 3-story palace for himself and the other kings in the original Frost Dragon's lair. Duque's own villa was a Duke level 2.5 stories. What was the result? 2.5 stories above and 3 stories below the ground, for a total of 5 stories. In this Duke's mansion, Duque set up a magic array. First he summoned Khadgar, Alonso's, Thaddeus and Farina. Then Vanessa opened the door to welcome the guests. Seeing Alonso's fail, these guests or helpers all bowed their heads. Nice to meet you, teacher. Theon and Gavin Rad bowed their heads first. followed by Riataline and Benedicta's, who were second in line, and then Sally Whitemane. Hee hee. I'm no longer a living person, so let's dispense with the customs of the mortal world. Alonso's was quite happy to see that his disciple was still active in the front line of fighting against evil. After some pleasantries, Duque went straight to the point. Since Si Thun is using all the insects to attack and stall for time, we won't be able to break into the deepest part of the temple of Encourage for a while. So, while the enemy is increasing in strength, we have to do something. My suggestion is to find a way to purify and absorb the souls of the twin emperors into the magic net as nodes of the magic net. At the same time, we can see if we can extract the divinity of the twin emperors and plant the seeds of divinity for those who are determined to break into the realm of gods. Hiss. Even though everyone knew that Duque had always been kind, no one really thought that Duque would take out the divinity as a trophy. In everyone's hearts, that was basically the absolute territory of the number one person in the alliance, Duque. And this time, even if Queen Sylvanas didn't participate in the fight against the twin emperors, Duque probably had a 70% to 80% chance of winning. Everyone was moved. Theme was even more respectful. I'm a straightforward person and I rarely admire anyone. But I want to say, besides my teacher Fail and Wuther, you are the third person I admire. Everyone offered words of praise. Duque waved his hand. Our fate is linked to Azeroth. If this planet is destroyed, Draenor is our role model. Even becoming a demigod is nothing to praise as long as everyone remembers the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. They were all from the Alliance, so there was no need for formalities. Maybe if Azeroth collapsed, the Alliance could follow the example of the Horde, using the Dark Portal to roll to a certain planet and launch a desperate invasion. Victory could ensure the continuation of the race, but what about failure? The Horde was the best example. Thinking of this, every Alliance hero felt the same way. Duque continued, I'll skip the pleasantries and ask directly, who wants to plant the seeds of a demigod? This time I expect to be able to extract 2 seeds. If you have the confidence, please come forward. There is a saying that goes, confidence may not necessarily win, but without confidence you will definitely lose. Hey, who wants it first? There was such a thing as not passing on responsibility. Queen Sylvanas proudly stepped forward with her long bow on her back. Her long eyebrows were slightly raised and she placed one hand on her hip. Her aura naturally spread out. The current alliance was said to be the 4 major races, but the dwarves were actually the vassals of the dwarves. Since the humans already had Duque and the elves had Sylvanas, Magni also stepped forward with the Balrog hammer on his back. Count me in. Originally, William was also quite tempted, but after seeing Magni step forward, William smiled and didn't move. Duque waved his hand and took out the souls of the twin emperors. It wasn't an exaggeration. Different from the little surprise of Prophet Skirim, the 2 demigod souls were Duque's biggest gain since attacking the Temple of Encourage. Chapter 1326. Unfortunately, the souls of the twin emperors were symbiotic and could not be separated and used separately. Of course, the difficulty of subduing them had more than doubled. If there were difficulties, they had to go up, and if there were no difficulties, they had to go up. It seemed like I said something wrong. Forget it, don't mind this little detail. In the next moment, the souls of the twin emperors separately emerged from the palms of Duque's hands. Emperor Vecnalis's eyes widened and he stared angrily at everything in front of him, but he immediately realized his powerlessness, because like his brother Emperor Veclor, he had lost their demigod bodies and became pure spiritual bodies. Yo, twin emperors, how are you feeling? Duque's face, in their vision, became immeasurably huge and very much in need of a beating. They opened their mouths, but were shocked to find that they could only let out soundless roars. They tried to change everything, using all the power they could use to change the situation, but unfortunately, the soul prison had completely sealed off all their power. The only thing they could do now was to be prisoners, captives, and obediently wait here for the victor, Duque, to judge them. Duque gently tossed his hands up, and the 2 soul prisons rose slowly, until they were imprisoned in midair by the magic array. Duque snapped his fingers and under everyone's gaze, the souls of the twin emperors began to grow, becoming the size of a dwarf. Twin emperors. Didn't you say that the victor gets everything? Now, as the victors, Duke Marcus and Sylvanas Windrunner, come enjoy our spoils of war. Duque pulled Queen Sylvanas over and they stood side by side. Clearly, the faces of the twin emperors twitched in pain. What had been said not long ago still echoed in the ears of the four of them. The reward of the victor should not be discounted. The etiquette of the loser should be done to the extreme. Right. They had said so. However, that was both the emperor's reserve and pride, and the absolute confidence of the strong. True warriors never thought about the consequences of failure because they never thought that they would fail. Admittedly, they could be as ugly as those captured mortals. For example, slamming the soul barrier in front of him with all his might. But this kind of thing, other than showing their helplessness, they would also lose their demeanor. They would not do it. Because to them this kind of ugly behavior was even crueler than death. Although the twin emperors had already experienced the pain of their bodies being blown up alive by the most intense holy light in history, that was only the torture of mortal bodies. The real torture was on the soul. They had lost. The two brothers had actually lost to a mortal woman and a human demigod who had yet to unleash his full power. He once thought that they were incomparably powerful, second only to Si Thun's power, second only to Si Thun's perfection. They didn't even care about the other ancient gods who were as famous as Si Thun. But now the cruel reality struck their worldview again and again. Anger, hatred, abomination. Even so, even though they gritted their teeth tightly, the twin emperors did not even need to speak. Their minds were connected and they had already made their decision. The twin emperors echoed each other. Speak, winner. What spoils of war do you want? Duque nodded. The first thing I want is your divinity. I mean divinity that has been stripped of your will, leaving only the characteristics of combat and magic. The divinity of other gods was not so easy to take. Apart from representing power and energy, divinity also represented the will and characteristics of a god or a demigod. Especially the will. If the will left on the divinity was forcibly dispelled, the result would either be failure and the will above would backfire, or it would be like Duque dealing with Prophet Skirim before where the loss was huge and it would be amazing if there was even one left after 2 points of divinity. If the other took the initiative to remove the divinity, that was another matter. Duque was not worried that the twin emperors would not give in. The biggest difference was not that there was no gain but how much gain. Yes. The oath of the emperors will not be broken. Having said that, the twin emperors were very straightforward, and directly began to withdraw the will on their divinity. This was not a simple thing. Divinity, as the most important asset of a demigod, was usually eager to inject the largest and most resolute will into it, to prevent it from being seized by the enemy. Every demigod did everything possible to stamp their own mark on every corner of the divinity. Now to remove the will in their divinity, and in a state where they had lost their divine body and had no support, the difficulty and hardships could be imagined. Duque wanted to provide magical support, but was refused by the stubborn emperor. This process lasted for a full half an hour, during which no one spoke, quietly watching the twin emperors cast the spell. It was finally done. All right. Here. The emperor will fulfill his promise. The twin emperors, echoing each other, gave 2 big gifts. Under the system prompt, Duque clearly saw the label on it. Melee non-attribute divinity 3 points, magic divinity 3 points, optional types, arcane, frost, fire, nature. A total of 6 points of divinity, and the twin emperors being so straightforward was also unexpected. Duque first carefully let the system check it, and after confirming that there were no problems he made the second request. He hoped that the twin emperors would become his elemental emissary. Unexpectedly, it was rejected by the other party with incomparable firmness. No, there is no room for negotiation. Absolutely not. The emperor can lose his empire, can lose his subjects and wealth, and even lose his queen, but the emperor must never kneel to the enemy. Duque's eyes narrowed. Didn't you say that the winner gets everything? The twin emperors were obviously angry and like a machine gun they opened the chatterbox. The entire Courage insect people empire is the servant of the greatest god, Thun. This is the will that is imprinted in the depths of every insect person's soul, and absolutely cannot be changed. Your request, we can't do it. And our failure does not mean that we surrender. Even if you are the winner, you are not qualified to gain our loyalty. You will fail in the end. The Supreme Sea Thun will lead the Kiraj insect people to occupy this world. That's right, humans, orcs, elves, trolls, whatever, are only worthy of being food for the Kiraj insect people. Feel lucky for your short victory. Your victory will end with the further awakening of our Lord Sea Thun. Ha ha. Ha. They were obviously two losers, but they laughed wildly and wantonly like conquerors who had won a complete victory. Not only did they laugh, but they also used their spiritual power to show scenes of terrible cruelty with sound effects. Chapter 1327. That was when the Cenarian fortress had yet to be reactivated, and there was only a team of night elves guarding it. The insects that covered the mountains and plains easily flooded the entire fortress. No. Is the War of the Shifting Sands going to start again? The ones guarding the fortress were the night elves' most elite sentries. So what? They were too few in number. The sharp arrows easily pierced the skulls of the insects, and the arrows that penetrated the brain took the insect's life. Shoot one dead and 3 more charged forward. Shoot 3 dead and a swarm of them surged forward. They were already short on manpower, and the vast fortress defense line was not something that could be maintained by a mere 30 people. In the blink of an eye, the entire defense line was broken through. As the captain, the druid merely sent out an owl to send a message. The sturdy armor was easily pierced through by the sharp mouthparts of the giant insects, and with a ripping sound, the armor and the delicate limbs were torn apart like a piece of paper. Duran. Sherna. An elf couple was instantly pushed away by the swarm of insects. The cruel insects did not kill them on the spot. Instead, they pierced their collarbones with their sharp horns and held them up high, facing each other, letting out a unique howl as if they were showing off. No, let her go. You can do whatever you want to me. Let her go. The strong Duran broke down. He cried and howled, begging the intelligent insects to let go of his lover. But all he got was the cruelest execution. The insects bit off their hands and feet one by one, swallowing and chewing them in front of each other. In the end, when their lower abdomens were bitten off, the couple, far away from home, breathed their last in each other's eyes of despair. Seeing this, Tyron was already furious. Her whole body was trembling. Duque was silent. He gently pulled Tyrande over and held her in his arms. He raised his hand to stop the twin emperor's provocative performance, but was suddenly stopped by Tyrande. Well, I want to see it to the end. It was not just her. Even though the faces of Queen Sylph and the other alliance champions were filled with anger, and even though their fists were already trembling from clenching too tightly, not a single person tried to stop the twin emperors. Sigh. Duque let out a long sigh. The scene changed to Thundercliff. A family of Tauran herdsmen were playing with their kodo beasts that were as large as rhinoceroses. The swarm of insects had arrived. They came without any scruples. The brave Tauran father used the thick totem pole to smash the 3 insects to death. Then his hands and feet were pierced by the long insect mouthparts and lifted up high. As the price for daring to resist the Kiraj insect people, his punishment was that in front of him, the insects first ate his 2 sons who were 3 years old and 1 year old, then his lover. Finally, under the ferocious laughter of the leader of the Kiraj insect people guards, he ordered the insects to dismember his body and eat him. What the father saw on his deathbed was the twisted heads of his wife and son. The scene changed again. At the Tree Shade Inn at the junction of the Dustwallow Swamp and the Crossroads. Because of the wood trade between the Alliance and the Horde, this place became the most harmonious place for humans and beastmen. Originally, this place was full of laughter. Even though both sides were armed with weapons, they were more like decorations. The heroic Theramore warriors dared to compete in drinking with the beastmen who were 1 size bigger than them. They dared to arm wrestle with them. Even if they lost, they kept fighting. On everyone's faces there was no longer any hatred in the past. When the swarm of insects arrived, everything changed. A huge number of flying insects drowned everything. The Alliance's artillery couldn't even fire 3 shots before the cannonier's head was cut off by the flying insects. On the simple arrow tower of the Horde, the troll thrower didn't even have time to throw a few javelins before the tower was knocked down by the giant insects the size of mammoths. He fell to the ground and was then swarmed by the insects and eaten. The humans and beastmen who were once enemies stood back to back and launched a desperate counterattack against the swarm of insects. Everything was in vain. Blood stained every corner of the tree shade in. Every wall was brutally smashed through. Every wooden pillar was bitten off like a tooth-grinding toy. Every warrior or civilian, together with their armor, was swallowed alive. Regardless of race, regardless of identity, regardless of age, regardless of man or woman, old or weak, sick or disabled. Seeing this, the Alliance heroes present were already beyond furious. However, the twin emperors added fuel to the fire. The Kiraji insects are the supreme rulers who rule this planet on behalf of our Lord. Just as you humans eat pigs, cows, chickens, and ducks, you lowly races are just food for us insect people. So don't be delusional. The noble insect people will never become your slaves. Until this moment, everyone finally understood. The twin emperors boasted of their nobility, but they were willing to concede defeat and give up their most precious divinity. But deep down they didn't think that their race had failed, and they still boasted of being noble and unparalleled. How laughable and pathetic was this? They were obviously Thun's slaves, but they were pretentious. They were clearly about to be exterminated, but they considered themselves to be masters. Suddenly, 2 golden lights fell from the top of the space. This was the holy light that the Alliance heroes were familiar with and comfortable with. For the twin emperors, this was acid, this was torture. Oh. It hurts. Unable to control themselves, the twin emperors screamed at the same time. The people led by Duque were dumbfounded, looking at the perpetrator. If it was Gavin Rad who couldn't help but make a move, Duque felt that it was normal. The problem was that the person who made a move was the former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. Aren't you known to be kind? What about your 3 main virtues? The twin emperors laughed in pain. Ridiculous. Don't humans kill? Don't humans have instincts? Alonso said seriously with a straight face. The reason why intelligent creatures are intelligent creatures is that intelligent creatures have rationality. They know how to control their instincts and not to indulge their instincts infinitely to trample on other intelligent creatures and strangle the living space of other creatures. Alonso's increased the punishment of the holy light while continuing. Races that don't know how to live in peace with other intelligent races in the world and abuse natural resources wantonly will bring about their own destruction. As long as they are willing to repent, I can accept even their current tribe. Because they have learned how to get along with other races. But it is clear that the current Kiraji insect people are not qualified to exist in the world of Azeroth. Duque was speechless. Archbishop, you are so domineering. Don't you think so? Could this be the legendary, monks don't lie, and if I say I will destroy your whole family, I will destroy your whole family? Or could it be that this is monks don't kill, and monks only kill familiar? Then may I ask Archbishop, do you kill them after they are cooked or roasted? Chapter 1328. As Alonso said this, Duque smiled. As expected, this former Archbishop of the Holy Light was not a pedantic person who would not let go of benevolence and equality. If he was a blockhead, he would not have created the Paladin, a vicious profession that could fight, defend, and heal despite having short legs. As a good friend and one of the biggest helpers on his path of growth, Duke naturally had to support Alonso's to the best of his abilities. Isn't it just a movie? I can do it too. Duque waved his hand and a Hollywood-level explosion happened. A comet fell from the sky and Tyrant showed what it meant to destroy your entire family. In front of this earth-shattering destructive power that only the strongest demigods or true gods could resist, all mortal powers were useless. A mushroom cloud rose. The ash hive exploded. Mushroom clouds rose one after another. The Zora hive and Rago hive were finished too. As the emperor, he had never taken the low-level insects seriously. He could do whatever he wanted to the insects. But in front of the enemy, even the low-level insects could not be easily humiliated. Duque's actions were a slap to the face and a resounding slap at that. Didn't you think that the insects were powerful? Didn't you say that the insects were the rulers of Azeroth? Why did they have to exterminate their entire clan? The death of each insect queen represented the destruction of a hive and a branch of the insect race. In the video, the number of insects killed and corpses collected by the Alliance and Horde Alliance was clearly shown. This kind of slap to the face with big data was crueler and more effective. Not only that, Duque also provided real-time combat footage. At this moment outside, the Alliance's cannons shook the sky, and mushroom clouds of various sizes rose in the empty space in front of the Ankh-Karaj temple. Not only did the insects at the center of the explosion die without a complete corpse, but even those within the range of the shockwave were stabbed to death by the sharp claws or broken limbs of their comrades. In the air, there were not many insects that could escape the large-scale coverage of the Tyrant 3 bombs. Occasionally, a few of them managed to advance, but they had to face the barrage of magic bullets that poured down on them like a storm from the countless magic towers. If he was lucky enough to come over, there would be griffins and wyverns to intercept him at close range. It wasn't that there weren't any large bugs that tried to break through. There was one in the image that was as large as a train carriage that tried to break through. In the end, Xianxia, who was entrenched on the platform of the fortress, pounced on it. With a sweep of her dragon tail, it was smashed into pieces and fell to the ground. The twin emperors felt as if their hearts had been cut by a knife. The destruction of his clansmen was indeed heartbreaking. What Duque showed next were the scenes of Archimonde Ragnaros, Nefarian Xianxia, and other powerful figures being defeated or killed. Every scene was so soul-stirring that they were shocked speechless. If it was an ordinary blow, although it was painful, they believed that they would be able to endure it in the end. Even if they had to endure the punishment and torture of the holy light, they were confident that their souls would not fall. Unfortunately, what they saw now was the greatest pain for them, because they saw the possibility of their master Thun being defeated. Thun was not invincible. 25,000 years ago he had been defeated once, and he had been defeated very, very badly. Not only was he seriously injured, but he was also completely sealed, locked in the deepest part of the earth like a dog. Our master might be defeated. Once this thought arose, it could not be extinguished. Their only goal now was to persevere and refuse to give in to Duque. Although even the twin emperors themselves did not know what the meaning of their perseverance was, Thun was like a bright light in the dark, the last breath that supported their will. Duque's voice, which did not sound loud, was amplified by his divine power, almost 10 times louder than a loudspeaker. Every note shook the twin emperors' minds. Stupid and pitiful creatures who can't see the big picture. Don't you know that the existence in front of the wheel of history, no matter how great or small you are, will be completely crushed? This is fate. Fate was a very mysterious word. When someone was invincible, he was definitely a proud dragon, even daring to pierce through the sky. When he was defeated and depressed, this word was the most terrible and unsolvable curse, firmly binding his soul with no hope of breaking free. Duque used the so-called fate to trick the Black Dragon Princess into becoming his mount after defeating her. When he had nothing to do, he would ride her for fun, and when he had something to do, he would ride her for battle. Felt so good. Now Duque had used this trick on the twin emperors. Duque's voice carried endless majesty and a hint of temptation. Are you still stubborn? Do you still expect your master Thun to turn the tables? This is ridiculous. The fate of Thun's destruction has been decided. In a month at most you can see Thun's corpse. This time not only did the twin emperors lose their voices, but even the Alliance's powerhouses looked shocked. These words were too exaggerated. Impossible. You can't defeat our master. Not to mention the twin emperors, even the Alliance's powerhouses were anxious for Duque. These words were too full of themselves. Even though Thun had been seriously injured, he was still a true god. Originally, the Alliance's attack on Ankh-Karaj was something they had no choice but to do. It wasn't easy for Duque to become a demigod, which gave everyone more confidence. In everyone's hearts, it would be good if they could grind Thun to death or seal it again. Duque actually boasted that he could kill an ancient god in a month? Even if everyone knew that Duque wanted to subdue 2 true demigods, that was too exaggerated. Duque didn't care at all and smiled with confidence. Twin emperors, why don't we make a bet? Duque's ambition was obvious, but the twin emperors couldn't be afraid. This was their last pride. Vecnala's face was cold. You're looking down on a true god too much. Vecnala's put on the same expression. This kind of bet that we will definitely win is meaningless. Duque still had his signature smile. I'm only asking you, do you dare or not? As you said and did, the winner gets everything. Within a month, as long as the Alliance, Horde and Dragon's hero group cannot defeat Thun, or do not dare to fight Thun, I will naturally let you return to your master safely. At that time, if it wants to reconstruct your body or something else, I will not stop it. This bet could not be said to be small. As a price, the twin emperors naturally knew what they had to pay. The two brothers said in unison, "As long as you or the Alliance can defeat our master Thun within a month, we will be loyal to you, and the entire Kiraj insect people will become the Alliance's slaves. Whether you want to enslave or slaughter them all, we won't complain." Chapter 1329. This oath sounded ridiculous. It was simply at the level of the Arabian Nights. After calming down and thinking about it carefully, one would find that it was not only Duque's side who had this idea. Similarly, the twin emperors were not idiots. If what Duque showed the twin emperors was only the scene of the destruction of the 3 insect nests of Silithus, it was just a demonstration, then the scene of the insects coming out of the temple of Ankh-Karaj to make a death charge told the twin emperors another key. After they were killed, Thun was tired of these worthless servants of the Karaj insect people. Outsiders could not see it, but as the insect people emperors, they could definitely see that in the charging swarm of insects, there were a large number of insects that were not qualified to be soldiers. No race would let their young go to the battlefield unless it was a matter of survival. Thun was burning the bridge after crossing it. This was the core reason that made the twin emperors angry and loosened their minds. With the help of the system, Duque saw the age structure of the insects, which was why he seemed to gamble. He seemed reckless and even boastful. If you thought about it carefully, you would know that there was no such thing as failure in Duque's dictionary. If the Alliance's hero group failed, then whether the souls of the twin emperors would be returned would naturally be decided by the victorious Thun. It was impossible for Duque to use Thun's servants to coerce Thun to let him go. If the Alliance won, then the twin emperors would undoubtedly find a new way to survive for the Kiraj insect people who were at the end of their rope. Of course, if the Alliance did not win, then naturally there was no need to mention anything. They did not overly force the twin emperors to make a decision now, and everyone dispersed after the twin emperors made their promise. Kalia asked, "If we win against Thun, will we really accept those terrible insects?" Duque smiled. "Are the orcs scary?" Kalia was suddenly enlightened. Yes, the orcs were also scary and cruel. These green-skinned humanoid monsters once ravaged the entire Eastern Kingdom, causing millions of deaths and injuries, plunging tens of millions of people into the flames of war, and bringing unforgettable terror and pain to all the major races of Azeroth. But now, these terrifying and cruel green-skinned creatures had become the allies of the entire Alliance. Was it funny? Was it worth hate and anger? Maybe not. In the face of the survival of an entire race or even the entire planet, racial hatred was nothing. Thanks to the tireless propaganda and guidance of the various countries over the years, the people's hatred towards the orcs had been slightly reduced. At least until the new enemy was eliminated, the fuse would not be lit. This situation also applied to the Kiraj insect people. Those insects would be useful in many ways if they were used as mounts, Theon commented. Yes, such as rugged caves, Varian nodded. In the air, griffins could be used. On relatively flat ground, horses could be used. In cold forest areas, the elves' nightmares could be used. However, in rugged and complicated hot terrain, there was nothing more suitable than insects. Tyrant cleared her throat and emphasized, "You'll need it. Don't forget that 10,000 years have passed. The Burning Legion, which once had hundreds of millions of demon warriors, has once again set their sights on Azeroth. 10,000 years ago, Duque's infernal affairs had inflicted heavy losses on the Burning Legion. 10,000 years was too long. No one knew what kind of terrifying combat power the Burning Legion had gathered in this period of time. In a sense, not just the insects, all intelligent creatures in Azeroth should unite to deal with the Burning Legion." The conversation between the few big shots of the Alliance made the others think. At this time, Edwin Van Cleef came over and bowed to Duque. Then he said in a voice that everyone could hear, "The Horde's heroes have just defeated Ayames the Hunter, and are preparing to challenge Osrian the Scarless tomorrow." "Oh, not bad." Duque raised his eyebrows. "Unfortunately, the losses are a little big." In the ruins of Ankh-Karaj, the Horde has so far lost 4 former members of the Silver Moon Parliament and 3 second-rate chiefs who were resurrected as Death Knights. Hearing this news, the expressions of the Alliance's heroes were very strange. As former enemies, even if they were not enemies now, seeing an enemy who had been killed almost 20 years ago come back to life and scare people again was a very complicated feeling. Moreover, Sar's method of absorbing a large number of undead into the horde had always made the Alliance's heroes feel disgusted. Now that those bones had been lost from the Alliance's point of view, it was a loss of combat power. From the Alliance's point of view, it was no different from setting off firecrackers to celebrate. Duque turned to look at Tyrande. Tyrande immediately understood and ran to contact Fandral Staghelm. After a while, Tyrande returned. It's good news. Because see, Thun realized that he could not further corrode the earth. He has begun to recover his divine power. What it could collect was only the Lilian ego that it had plundered in the Silithus territory. This process will probably last for about 10 days. Duque said. Edwin informed Sar of the situation. Let him do as he sees fit. No one was willing to fight an ancient god who had recovered better. Wait for more combat power? Launch an attack while the ancient god was weak before he recovered? This was a very difficult choice. There was no such thing as having the best of both worlds. The higher the level of a commander, the more painful choices they had to make in all kinds of unfavorable situations. Fortunately, while Thun was accumulating strength, the Alliance was not idle either. Duque split the 3 points of divinity from the sword Emperor Vecnala's into 3 portions. One was for Magni, one was for Servanas, and the last one was for him. Even though each portion did not actually have a single point of divinity, it was a special energy that contained divine power waves. And don't think that Vecnala's only knew how to use a sword. In reality, he was also one of Azeroth's specialties. Almost all the experts in this world were all-rounders. For example, Anduin Lothar could wield a 5-meter-long lance while riding a horse, shoot a squirrel's eye from 50 meters away with a bow while on horseback, and swing a 2-handed greatsword like it was child's play. What weapon he used to be famous was purely because he was most comfortable with it. Vecnala's archery was also very good. The experts of the Alliance were basically all in important positions. After witnessing the twin emperors' submissive bet, everyone dispersed. After Duque had arranged other matters, he could finally relax. Unknowingly, it was already late at night. In the villa in Naxxramas, Duque collapsed on the sofa, not wanting to move even half a finger. He was too tired. He had just become a demigod and had to rush over to save the day. Then there were all kinds of trivial matters. Suddenly he heard a knock on the door. Come in. A beautiful figure flashed in front of the magic lamp at the door. Accompanied by a fragrant wind, a graceful blonde figure appeared in front of him. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.